Custas and Dagda were saved from a grim fate by the mysterious Onii-Chan. But in doing so, a spell was cast directly on a human body, a blatant violation of the principles. As Silver Eve begins, an uneasy tension spreads through the air, and the once unbreakable rules that Coco and her friends believed in begin to fall apart. Will this forbidden act change everything they thought they knew? Let's find out. A seal chair was shown, a device that allowed someone who could not walk to move independently. Lucy was surprised to hear that it was being returned to them. She was not sure she had understood correctly, but the person carrying it confirmed that it was indeed being returned. Someone had requested that it be handed back to one of the witches wearing a crimson cloak when they passed by. Lucy fell into thought. That was unusual, which puzzled the woman speaking to her. According to Lucy, contraptions like that were rarely surrendered so easily. Seal chairs were extremely expensive. A person who depended on one to move normally would never willingly part with it. Even in cases where the need was only temporary, such devices were often sold through questionable means. She reflected that the chair had a tracking spell engraved into it. They had gone through great lengths to monitor its location. As long as the chair remained in the hospital, she had assumed the child who used it was still there as well. She admitted she had been careless in that assumption. Afterward, she took out a piece of cloth with a spell drawn upon it. The chair suddenly transformed, shrinking the large device into a small seal chair that could easily be hidden and carried. The woman looked impressed and remarked how convenient it was. Lucy then asked if she knew where the patient and the child's caretaker were headed. The woman replied that they were probably traveling to his rest. She had heard the child mention the festival of the Crown City. Lucy thought that was good to hear. If they were going to Silver Eve, they would surely meet again. She remembered the man who had pleaded for their help and entrusted his child to their care. Despite the child's small complication, Lucy said she was glad to hear that the child had fully recovered. The woman looked startled and corrected her. There had been no full recovery. In truth, the child's injuries had been severe. It would take a very long time before he could walk on his own again, if that day ever came. That made Lucy ask why the chair had been returned. The woman answered cheerfully that it was no longer needed. It was all thanks to two little witch friends. Lucy immediately grew curious. She asked who those two young witches were. She wanted to know their names. The scene then shifted to another place. Riding in a carriage, Coco was busy drawing in her notebook while her brush buddy slept beside her, and the others were occupied with their own tasks. Kifri was inspecting something together with his apprentice Tatia. They said it seemed fine now, or at least they thought it would work. When it was opened, Kifri examined it and wanted to give her a hint. There was a spell inside, and he noticed that the sigil was somewhat small compared to the size of the ring. He suspected that the effect of the spell might end up too weak. He suggested drawing the ring first, then filling it with the largest sigil that could fit inside. What they were creating was a seal meant to repel beasts. Tatia was impressed by the idea. She said that with that method, it would be easier to achieve the proper balance. However, Kifri suddenly froze when Tatia closed the ring. He said it should not be closed yet. The moment it was sealed, it triggered a powerful reaction in the surroundings. Kifri immediately shielded his apprentice and pulled her away. Sitting on the ground afterward, Tatia admitted that she had forgotten how dangerous it was to close an empty ring. The act had produced a powerful shockwave that startled the other apprentices nearby. Kifri told them that next time they should be careful about the proper order when drawing spells. After that, they continued their journey. Their carriage was being pulled by a beast-shaped creature made of water, created through Kifri's magic. Someone commented that when he said they would travel by road, she could not understand why they had to spend several days on the journey instead of simply using the windowway. That person was Agat. It had never crossed her mind that part of a witch's duty was to repair the faded seals lined along the roads. Kifri said that was correct. It was only one of the many duties they had. As they crossed a bridge, he explained that once they became full witches, they too would have the obligation to perform acts of service. No fewer than 3 each season. These could be direct requests from the Great Hall, simple assistance for travelers passing by, or daring rescues in times of disaster. That day, they happened to be maintaining the roadside seals that repelled beasts. Some witches took great pride in this kind of work and the reputation that came with it. Others even traveled all year long, completing 20 or 30 different acts of service each season. As he adjusted the spell he was working on, he added that since the 4 of them had passed their second trial, they would join Ollie and him once the snow arrived to travel to places that needed help. For now, they should simply think of their trip to Silver Eve as a small test. Meanwhile, throughout all of this, Coco remained completely focused on her book. She was absorbed in reading when someone suddenly tugged on what she was holding. It was her master, Kifri. He told her that they should not waste the opportunity they had. He admired her eagerness to study, but encouraged them to lift their heads from their books and take in the beauty surrounding them. They should allow the splendor of the land to settle into their minds. Coco shielded her eyes from the sunlight, but when she finally looked, she was amazed. The scenery was breathtaking, with the vast open land and the sun slowly setting across the horizon. Coco was deeply impressed by the view, and so were the others traveling with them. Kifri then glanced at the book she had been studying and noticed the counterclock seal inside it. Coco grew nervous when he pointed it out, but Kifri simply said that spells of that kind had to be handled with great care. As he recalled, he had not yet explained that to them. Coco quickly took the book back and said she already knew. She understood that it was forbidden to use such a spell on people. She assured him not to worry, saying she knew she should never attempt it. However, Kifri sensed something different in her thoughts. He looked at her and said that while she knew it was forbidden, it seemed she could not stop herself from imagining the possibility of using it. Coco was surprised by what he said. She asked if he had ever thought about using that spell on a person. Kifri admitted that it was not only him. In fact, he believed that every witch who had ever lived had entertained that idea at least once. He then called the others, telling them it was time to set up camp before the sun disappeared. Meanwhile, Coco remained deep in thought about his answer. A short while later, night had already fallen along the road. They set up a bonfire to provide both warmth and light. While they were eating, Tetia said it was a shame that Master Ollie had not been able to join them. Kifri replied that Ollie had a habit of working until the very last moment. However, he would meet them in the city later through the windowway. He was simply overwhelmed by the amount of work he still had to finish and had asked for 1 week, then corrected himself and said he would only need 3 more days. Kifri said he understood that Tarda and Mr. Nalnoa were already in his rest, preparing the tent. If all went well, they would reach the city tomorrow and help them there. Because of that, Tetia suddenly grew nervous. She hoped that their clients would like the spells they had come up with. Kifri reassured her that they certainly would. It was a very excellent spell, he said. In fact, they had not even reached the city yet, and it had already proven its value. They were already using it for their camp. Tetia walked over to her invention and thought about calling it the Sand Tent Staff, though she had not fully decided on the name yet. All it needed was to be planted into the ground and set upright like a pole. Just like that, their camp would be ready. She demonstrated it to them and explained that she had gotten the idea from the sand tent she and Coco had hidden inside at the Serpent Back Cave. She had designed the contraption to resemble a walking staff, which was why she thought of naming it the Sand Tent Staff. Feeling a little embarrassed, she asked what they thought and wondered if the idea sounded too ridiculous. However, the others told her it was amazing and really cool. Riche even added that because of its design, it could also serve as a walking stick during travel, and the spell would still provide shelter even when it rained. Travelers would surely love something like that. Tetia hugged her and thanked her, saying her compliments were always the best and brought joy to her heart. She then returned the praise by talking about the contraption she had made earlier. She said it was impressive as well and very clever. By splitting the crystal in two, pulling it apart, and weaving the pieces together, it became a pair of matching bracelets. Riche looked down at the bracelet she was wearing and said she would call it the split shard bangle. When the pattern was pressed, the ring closed and a beam of light shot out, pointing toward the other piece. With a contraption like that, no matter where they went, they would always be able to find their way back to their friend or to someone special to them. Because of that, Kifri said that she had carefully thought about the meaning behind her creation. It was important to understand why a spell was made. Magic was born from hopes and dreams of how the world could become better. He suspected that a magic like hers, created so that loved ones would never feel too far apart, reflected a wish that would resonate in many hearts. Riche then took something out and said that she had also made something for them. However, those were special. It was a crystal divided into 6 different pieces so that all of them would be connected by a web of light. She said she did not like how they had been separated in Ramadan and admitted that it had been a little frightening. That was why she made those rings, to keep them safe. If anything ever happened, they only needed to shine the light and they would know that help was on the way. That was the promise those rings represented. The others were amazed by the invention she handed to them and were delighted. Coco thanked her and promised she would take good care of it. In fact, she said she would carry it wherever she went. Hearing that made Riche suddenly shy, but deep inside she felt incredibly happy. They then became curious about what Coco had made, though she felt embarrassed about it. Meanwhile, Kifri called out to Agat, which surprised her. He was very curious about what she had been working on all this time. He had not even managed to catch a glimpse of it. Perhaps she could allow him to examine it briefly, just to ensure its safety, especially since it would end up in the hands of people unfamiliar with their craft. However, Agat replied that she had nothing to show. Kifri told her she did not need to be so modest. Yet she insisted she was telling the truth. She had not made any contraption at all. That answer caught Kifri off guard. He pointed out that she had been staying up late for weeks working on something. If there was any problem, he was ready to offer advice. Coco was also puzzled by Agat's response. But Agat explained that that was not the issue. She had no intention of selling anything. The spell she had been practicing all those nights was for the procession. Kifri was surprised and asked if she meant to perform. She answered yes. She wanted to present a magic that everyone could see. That was why she had decided to practice for the main event of the festival. She would present her spell to the royal family. The scene then shifted as an ancient poem was shared, beginning with the line, "Sail sleeping skies, the stars like silver ships." The poem described how magic was originally a gift from the heavens, shared with humankind. Long ago, a messenger from the sky descended to the world. There, he fell in love with a maiden from the Silverwood and granted her the gift of his magic so that she might live free from suffering in her cold and unforgiving world. However, the maiden's love was divided. She loved all the living beings who dwelled alongside her in that land. Because of that, the gift meant only for her was passed on to the weakest and most pitiful creatures throughout the land. And so began the Age of Man. From that moment, the world of witches came into being. It was an ancient tale of wonder, sung across countless generations. After their long journey, Kifri and his 4 apprentices finally arrived at the city. When they reached it, the place was already full of life. People filled the streets, and joy could be seen on their faces. Kifri explained that the ceremony marking the beginning of Silver Eve would take place the following morning. It seemed they had arrived in the city at just the right time, just before it was too late. Coco was shocked when she heard that. She could not believe he said they had arrived just in time. She asked if they were looking at the same city, because from what she could see, the festival had already begun. Kifri replied that she was correct, it was indeed a festival. However, what they were seeing now was the Golden Eve. They should think of it as a kind of warm-up, an extra celebration for those who could not wait for the main event. All around them were scenes of celebration, and Coco was delighted by the atmosphere. Kifri explained that once the first passage of the stars crossed the sky, the entire city filled with anticipation at the knowledge that Silver Eve was drawing near. Merchants gathered from every corner of the peninsula, and before long the streets became crowded with stalls and vendors. Before anyone realized it, the whole of his rest would be overflowing with festivity. There would be celebrations every day. Coco said it had only been about a month since the night they saw the falling stars. She wondered if that meant the city had been celebrating the entire time. Nearby, a witch floated in the air. From the notebook he held, something flew upward and filled the sky. The people watching cheered with delight as it burst like a display across the heavens. Kifri added that on Silver Eve itself, there would be an enormous amount of work to take care of. Many witches would be attending, and they would not have a moment to waste, so everyone was eager to enjoy themselves while they still had the chance. In simple terms, Golden Eve served a very important purpose. It was an opportunity for even the busiest among them to rest and experience the joyful spirit of the festival. Coco was amazed when she heard the purpose of the event. The excitement was clearly written across the faces of Coco, Tetia, and Riche as they looked forward to joining the celebration, while Agat stood quietly off to the side. Seeing the eager expressions of the three, Kifri said that since they would likely be extremely busy the next day, he thought it would be fine if they explored the festival for a while as they made their way to meet Tarda and Mr. Nalnoa. The three of them were thrilled and commented that their master Kifri was truly the best. From there, they began wandering around to see what was happening in the city. Numerous stalls sold delicious food, others offered various goods, and dancers performed at the main square. As they continued walking, they passed over a bridge, encountered some unusual animals, and saw many other interesting things. Before long, they were getting closer to their destination, where Tarda and Mr. Nalnoa were waiting. However, as they walked, a few witches cast unpleasant looks toward Kifri. One gossiping woman whispered to another, asking if her guess about him was correct. Was he the witch everyone had been talking about, the one who had lost an eye? She had thought it was only a rumor, but he was clearly wearing glasses. She had also heard that he once studied under a wise one, yet she wondered if it was really true that he had run away from the hall. Kifri ignored the whispers being said about him, when Coco suddenly called out to him and asked him to come closer. She asked if he had ever seen so many people gathered in one place. He had not expected that question. Coco was overwhelmed, saying that everywhere she looked there was something new, wonderful, and mysterious. The smells drifting from every stall they passed were mixed together, sweet, savory, and all kinds of other aromas. Kifri then asked if she was enjoying herself. Coco admitted that she was enjoying it very much, but she suddenly paused and wondered aloud if it was really all right for her to have fun there. Kifri was puzzled by her question and asked why it would not be. He encouraged her to simply enjoy herself. He told her to savor the bright and joyful days, because they were meant for everyone, and that included her. Their companions then called out, asking if they were coming along. They said they should hurry because there was something they had to see. Tatia pulled Coco along in her excitement, saying she would not believe what she was about to see. When Coco looked up, she was amazed. Birds could be seen flying across the sky above the magnificent palace of the city. Coco was filled with joy when she noticed it, and Kifri explained that it was the glory of Castle Rest, the royal seat of the king of his rest, the ruler of the allied kingdoms of the peninsula, Zoze Estes. He then called his apprentices and said they should continue walking. Tarda was surely eager to hear of their arrival. He called for Coco, and she quickly followed. After a short while, Tarda finally noticed their presence. Mr. Nalnoa also greeted Kifri and remarked that they had finally made it there. However, he seemed surprised that they all looked so exhausted. Kifri could only laugh. The central square had simply been too intense. Pushing through the crowds had been quite an experience. But Mr. Nalnoa told him to prepare himself, because tomorrow everything would be even more lively. Off to the side, Tarda explained that they could use the doorknob he was holding to enter the luggage room. They only needed to remember the pattern design on one of the knobs, since that one led to the bath and washroom. Another doorknob would take them to their sleeping quarters, and if they wanted to lock the door, they simply had to remove the knob from their side. Tatia peeked inside and noticed how comfortable the room looked. Meanwhile, Kifri thanked Mr. Nalnoa, saying it was very kind of him to allow them to use his tent. But Mr. Nalnoa replied that he should be the one thanking them for offering their help. He then asked if there were only 5 of them. Kifri explained that Arujo might be arriving a little later. Just then, Arujo suddenly appeared and said he had made it in time after all. He had already expected the crowd to be huge, just like before. He was glad he had managed to finish everything he needed to do, so he could arrive that very day. Coco was shocked when she saw him. Kifri commented that, as usual, he had almost missed it again. Coco stared at him in surprise and asked if that was really their Master Ali. Arujo looked confused by her question and replied that of course it was him. Coco explained that she was just surprised because he had shaved his beard, but he asked who said he had shaved it. He smiled and said it was the work of his newest contraption. He called it the makeover mask. No matter how tired someone might be, it ensured that others would always see them looking their best. Was that not cool? When the mask was removed, however, his real appearance was revealed. None of them expected to see the deep dark circles under his eyes. Tatia even commented that it was the worst look she had ever seen on him. Because of that, Ali quickly put the mask back on. Even so, he explained that there was an upside to everything. Because of the extra time he had spent working, he had finally managed to properly prepare his magic for the Silver Eve procession. Kifri then remembered that if the opportunity arose, There was something about the procession he wanted to discuss with him. Agat was startled when she heard that. Orujo agreed, but said they could talk about it when he returned. One of his noble patrons was hosting a banquet, and he felt he should at least make an appearance. Maybe he could even sneak in a drink or two. He was looking forward to it, because a grand banquet meant grand wine. However, Kifri immediately warned him not to even think about it. He had not slept at all, and alcohol was the last thing he needed. When he arrived at the party, he should only be drinking water, and plenty of it. Orujo did not expect such a statement and asked if Kifri was his father. Tatia became excited when she heard about the banquet with royalty. Tarda also grew curious and asked if it would be held in the enormous castle at the center of the city. Orujo denied that. His patron apparently had a private villa. Besides, he said he could not possibly walk into Castle's Rest looking the way he currently did. They could not present themselves before the royal family without proper formal attire, and he told them to forget about the mask. Tatia could not help but comment that considering his usual appearance, she was surprised he even wanted to remove it. Orujo did not expect that remark. However, Kifri pointed out that they might not have realized something important. That mask would not even be allowed inside. They were puzzled when they heard that. Kifri gestured for Coco to look toward the castle and explained that it was guarded by spells meant to prevent anyone from casting magic within. Even contraptions were not permitted past the entrance. Coco thought about that, realizing the castle of the king existed without any magic at all. The scene then shifted to inside the castle. Members of the Knights Morales could be seen walking through the halls. Utawan looked around and admitted that no matter how many times he entered that castle, it always made him uneasy. He remarked that they were always on constant alert, always thinking about what could happen and how they would handle it without magic. And that was only the beginning of. Before he could finish speaking, Aestes told him not to give in to unease. His skill with the spear was remarkable, with magic or without it. Aestes told him to stand tall, because there was no threat in those halls that he could not face. Utawan was visibly surprised by those encouraging words. He replied that such praise coming from him was high indeed, enough to refill his small vessel of self-respect. Even so, they still did not have so much as Sylph shoes, and he was sure he was not the only one who felt that way. Aestes then said that if those walls truly unsettled him, he could rest assured that the three waiting for them likely felt it even more. When the door was opened, several witches were waiting at the balcony. One of them was Belderut, the wise in teachings, and it seemed he was accompanied by two of the three wise witches. Aestes knelt in their presence and reported for duty, saying that he was at their disposal. He addressed them as the wise ones, the stewards of order throughout the land. The four witches present looked toward him as he bowed before them. However, one of them suddenly stood up and gripped the stick she was holding tightly. Aestes became alarmed when he noticed that she suddenly rushed toward him. She attacked him repeatedly, forcing him to raise his staff to block the strikes. Despite her relentless assault, he only smiled. Moments later, she struck his leg, throwing him off balance and causing him to fall, something he had not expected. She stepped onto his back and commented on what he had said earlier about them being doubly unnerved. Was he certain about that? She asked him. Aestes could only shut his eyes. She had expected that she trained her apprentice better than that. The old witch smiled and said that next time he should be careful whose ears might be waiting on the other side of the door. Aestes could only sigh. He replied yes and addressed her as Captain Banana. He said he would remember that lesson. Even so, he could not help but wonder what kind of message it sent when members of the Order attacked others the moment they met. He would be glad if she could set a better example for those under his command. Banana simply laughed and apologized. She glanced toward the two guards standing by the door and said she had no intention of hurting him. It had simply been too perfect an opportunity to pass up. The two guards looked nervous as she glanced at them. It was then that Aestes realized it had been a demonstration, and he finally understood what she had done. Meanwhile, someone lifted Belderut from the chair where he had been sitting. He remarked that it would not look good if their majesties thought they would be forced to submit and be defeated simply because they had no ability to use their magic. Another voice then cut in, saying they should not worry. Ensuring that such a thing would never happen was precisely why he was there. Aestes wondered who he was. The man then knelt and realized that they had not been properly introduced yet. He introduced himself as Lagra, who had only recently inherited the title of Wise in Friendship. With a smile, He said it was a great honor to meet Aesthis, and there before him stood the three wise witches. In another place, a meeting was taking place. One of the participants suddenly stood up in anger. He declared that the situation was a grave insult. He questioned why they had only just heard about the resignation of Lord Angendale. According to him, they should have been given proper notice beforehand. He added that they could not accept such a decision and addressed them with clear frustration. Lagra replied that whether they accepted it or not, the matter had already been settled. He also said that he did not recall any formal obligation requiring them to inform the kingdoms about such appointments. However, the man argued that it did not need to be written into any agreement. It was simply something that basic respect demanded. He explained that the passage of the stars signaled the time of harvest, and that Silver Eve marked the beginning of the snowfall. This was precisely the season when the power of witches was needed the most. It was the time of harsh frost and ice. He could not believe that this was the moment they had chosen to appoint a new wise in friendship. They needed an experienced intermediary to manage the aid that would be sent to their cities. He called the decision foolish. A matter of such magnitude, he said, required advice and consultation. He insisted that they should consult the five kingdoms and seek final approval from His Majesty, the supreme ruler of Zoza Estis. The five kingdoms he referred to were the ruler of the sea, who sat upon the Dragon Pass Isles, the ruler of the flocks from the highland pastures, he who was the ruler of the fields and lord of the golden plains, the ruler of the trees who dwelled in Mist Grove by the water's edge, and the ruler of the stones in Mudrock Canyon. Even the supreme monarch of Zozo itself, the one who unites the five kingdoms, is not someone the witches obey, Lagra replied. Their affairs belong only to them. They do not form alliances with any nation on the peninsula. It would be better to think of them as messengers from the heavens. They have no country of their own and no banner they serve. They exist only to answer the call of the common people. The ruler of the flocks then commented that such a statement about answering the call of the people sounded rather strange. He said he did not wish to be overly bold, but it made him wonder whether what the witches truly valued was the clinking of coins. Lagra did not respond to that remark. The ruler of the flocks continued, saying he remembered well that the only reason their kingdoms benefited from the witches' services was because they paid enormous taxes and magic. Yet despite all that money, their pleas for assistance were only answered when the disaster involved natural calamities. Droughts, heavy rains, snowstorms, volcanoes, things like that. He asked whether they realized that their nations also faced many other problems. Magic would be of great help in driving away bandits and pirates. After all, they often claimed that a single witch possessed the strength of 100 soldiers. Surely such actions could also be considered helping others. Venana answered firmly that no, they do not interfere in disasters created by humans. The ruler of the flocks responded that it was a shame. They possessed immense power, yet they chose carefully when to share it. The ruler of the stones added that it was very easy for them to turn their backs on others. Across the entire peninsula, ordinary people were suffering from attacks by bandits. Another voice cut in, calling that attitude pure arrogance. The one who spoke was the ruler of the sea. He asked who they thought paid for the luxurious lives they lived in their castle filled with magic, their great hall beneath the sea. It was the backs of the people of the five kingdoms, he said. Before he could finish, someone descended the staircase and declared that it was enough. He said that witches refused to side with any nation so that they could offer help fairly to all. They claimed no land because their love for the world extended equally to every corner of it. They followed no king so that their power would never become a weapon under any banner. The man stepped down accompanied by his two whisker cats and asked the witches to forgive the lack of respect shown by his companions. He addressed them as wise and compassionate neighbors. I presume, Lagra replied. He addressed the man as Your Majesty, for he was King D'Anraldi of the peninsula. The king laughed and remarked that it was quite a long name. He asked the one he called Lord Lagra the Wise to simply call him Dean instead. He said it should be considered a symbol of their new friendship. The king apologized once again. He explained that the harvest from the Golden Plains had been poor in recent years. Surely, he said, they could understand why everyone was deeply worried about the coming snowfall. Meanwhile, as one of the whisker cats wandered around the room, the ruler of the fields could only gulp nervously in fear. The king continued by saying that no one present doubted the great debt they owed to the witches and their magic. It was thanks to them that all of Estus lived in peace and stability. Because of them, the people did not starve or shiver from the cold. They lived without fear, and they were able to celebrate this great festival year after year. He acknowledged that without their help, none of those blessings would exist. That was why he asked them to continue granting their wisdom and strength, so they would be prepared to face disasters not caused by enemies, but by the ordinary forces of nature that affected everyone. Lagra agreed and almost addressed the king as Your Majesty, but quickly corrected himself and instead called him King Dean, as the king had requested. The two of them expressed the hope that their paths would always meet and remain connected as they shook hands. Soon after, the meeting came to an end. The scene then shifted to the chamber of the three wise witches, where Belderut had already collapsed onto a couch in frustration. He complained about the king, saying he could not believe the man had used the discussion about the coming snowfall to divert attention away from the complaints of the five kingdoms. He had not expected the king to bring up the idea of disasters not caused by enemies. Belderut remarked that the man truly had a sharp tongue. Lagra replied that the king had cornered him. He had no room to refuse the clasp of covenant. Because of that, it would now become much harder for them to refuse additional calls for aid in the future. He added that the king was indeed a brilliant strategist. Another witch approached him and said that they were relying on him. The new wise in friendship must stand firm. However, a voice suddenly complained from the floor. One witch, bound in restraints, could not believe what he had just heard. According to him, that title belonged to him. He demanded to know whether Lagra intended to steal his position. He called him a traitor. He asked how he could possibly have done such a thing. Utawin then told him to be silent, addressing him as Lord Angendale. He said that he himself was responsible for everything that had happened. Estes added that they had known about his crimes for a long time. For years, he had approved countless requests that were never truly necessary, and they had the evidence to prove it. Many dragons had been captured simply to fill private menageries, and countless luxurious decorations had been placed in the homes of nobles. Estes said it was certain that he had filled his pockets with all the meaningless personal favors he had arranged. Vinana stepped closer and asked if he truly expected to escape from this. It was disgraceful to think that one of the wise could fall so low. She then ordered Utawin to take him away, saying that it was time for them to have a thorough discussion. Because of that, Utawin dragged Lord Angendale away while he remained bound. Belderut apologized and said that under those circumstances, it was better to arrest him there, in a place where magic could not be used. Too much could be lost if they handled it in the usual way. Lagra then asked whether they would erase his memories after the interrogation. Belderut replied that there was no need to even ask such a question. They acknowledged that they owed him a great deal for exposing what Angendale had done. However, Lagra said he had only done what was right. Hearing that made Belderut reflect on the idea of doing what was right. As witches, they should serve as examples of righteousness. There could be no room for flaws among them. If they wished never to be conquered, they must not seek to conquer others either. They must always serve for the sake of others and use their craft for the greater good. Meanwhile, the king looked down from the balcony of his castle and smiled. Belderut continued, saying that this was the image they must present to the world. Otherwise, everything they had could disappear. The beauty they saw below might vanish, and he feared that when that time came, it might be lost forever. That night, the apprentices of Kifri were shown already asleep, except for Agad, who was still practicing the spell she intended to perform in the procession. Outside, the city remained lively as the celebrations continued. Tarda, meanwhile, could not sleep that night. Coco lay beside Brushbuddy, while Kifri simply gazed upward at the sky, watching it quietly. In another place, Uini appeared in his scale wolf form. He called out to Elira and pointed toward the sky. Elira wondered what he meant. Uini held his neck and returned to his normal form. He noticed that there were even more passage stars now. That made Elira wonder whether that meant Silver Eve had already arrived. Elsewhere, Inania appeared speaking to someone. She asked whether it was not tiring for him. His rest was not very far anymore, and if he was tired, he could simply fly. The one she was speaking to, Custis, refused. He said he would continue walking. The paths they were traveling were beginning to converge, and as the dawn slowly began to rise, their celebration was drawing closer to its destined moment. The next day, Joy was clearly written across Coco's face as she watched the celebration in his rest. She was amazed and told Tatia that there were so many people. Tatia replied that they had come to see the opening parade. They would be able to watch the king and his knights march there. However, someone in front of them overheard and remarked that they might already be too late for that. Tatia was shocked and frustrated, upset that they had missed it. She tugged on Master Ali's robe and asked how he could do this to her. She had really wanted to see the Whisker Cats. If he had not slept in, they would have arrived on time. Ali apologized to her. Meanwhile, Coco pointed towards something and asked if that was Lulusi. Someone answered that it was the Order's pennant dance. Other members of the Knights Moralis were dancing as part of the procession, including Galga and Dutawan. As they performed, Estes suddenly noticed Coco watching from the side with wide eyes. He gave her a harsh look, which made Coco nervous. However, Tardis suddenly pulled her away, saying they needed to leave now. They had to return to the tent. Once the parade ended, the streets would surely become crowded, and it would be difficult to get back. Coco thanked him for calling her, which made Tarda flustered and blush. He had not expected that reaction. He realized he had almost grabbed Coco's hand, which embarrassed him even more. So he simply shoved his hands into his pockets and reminded her not to wander off or disappear. Coco followed and agreed. There were countless stalls around them, selling all kinds of magical contraptions. The people attending were fascinated, especially the children. Even Kifri's apprentices were thrilled. Everywhere they looked, there was magic, and it made everything feel lively and joyful. Kifri said they would probably have time later to look at the displays, but for now he thought they would enjoy seeing what their own tent looked like. It was called the Starry Sword Magic Stationer's Silver Eve pop-up shop. Many magical items were displayed there, which filled Coco with excitement. They also noticed that they already seemed to have their first customer, since Mr. Nalnoa was speaking with someone. When the man saw them, he approached Kifri and apologized for the interruption, but asked whether they had seen a young boy running around nearby. He said the boy looked about the same age as Coco and was wearing a copper indigo cloak. Kifri replied that he had not noticed anyone like that. The man nodded and apologized again for disturbing them. However, if they happened to see the boy, the castle guards would appreciate it if they informed them. Arujo wondered what that was about. Coco was surprised to realize the man was not a customer after all. The man then returned to the castle guard with him and asked whether they had found any sign of the boy. The guard replied that they had not. There were also no reports about him in the area. The guards looked irritated and called the boy a little rascal. He apparently did this every Silver Eve. At his age now, they expected him to behave more like a prince. Another guard replied that this was exactly when he expected it the most. Had he not dreamed of it himself once? His companion answered that he would grow out of it eventually and accept it. Everyone already knew that he would never become a witch anyway. Meanwhile, the boy they were searching for was hiding near the tent. While the guards were distracted, he quietly slipped away and ran off again. The scene then shifted to the tent of the Knights Moralis. They noticed a group of castle guards passing by, and Lulusi recognized them as the Knights of the Crown. Utawan confirmed it while taking a drink. He wondered why they seemed to be in such a hurry. They were not exactly any luckier themselves. According to him, the day ahead would be very difficult. From the pennant dance, they would go straight into guard duty. He complained that they would not even have half an hour to enjoy the festivities or get any rest. Just then he noticed Galga behind them, placing his uniform off to the side. Utawan was surprised and asked why he was not wearing it. Galga replied that his shift had already ended and he was now off duty. He planned to enjoy the festival with his partner, so he was leaving the work to them. He then walked out, wrapping an arm around his partner as they left together. When Utawan saw that, he could hardly believe it. Since when did Galga have a life outside of work? He said Galga was incredibly lucky. He could not believe the man actually had a date. How could someone from the Knights Moralis even manage that? Lulusi overheard the remark and said she believed Galga's gentle personality probably helped. Although she was not entirely sure why being a member of the Order should prevent someone from having a romantic relationship. Utawan responded that she had probably experienced it herself, how people's interest in them seemed to vanish like smoke the moment they heard what their job was. The two of them then went on patrol. As they walked, it was noticeable how the witches nearby looked at them. Utawan said that was exactly his point. No one wanted to associate with them. While ordinary witches drew the seals, their duty was to erase them. For him, It was clear why the order was not exactly well liked. Lucy replied that even though they were avoided and often received no thanks for what they did, the role of the Knights Moralis was still important. If anything, she believed it was better that way. It made their work easier. She would rather have society show the proper respect for the service they provided than force a sense of closeness that was not genuine. Oniii-Chan simply agreed. It reminded him why she had joined their ranks in the first place. Suddenly, several of their fellow knights arrived in a hurry, calling out their names. Lucy immediately asked if something was wrong and told them to just say where they needed to go. The others explained that forbidden contraptions were being sold near the castle wall, close to the southern gate. Echo and Etlin were already chasing the suspect there. Oniii-Chan replied that they were on their way. When he asked what kind of contraption it was, the man could not fully explain the nature of the device because of its sensitive theme. Hearing that, concern appeared on Lucy's face. The scene then showed the man running while carrying the illegal contraption. He shouted at the twins chasing him, asking if they would not just give up. He insisted that he had not created anything forbidden and told them to just leave him alone. However, the two continued pursuing him. Echo asked his brother if he had heard what the man just said. According to him, it was not forbidden magic. Etlin agreed, but clarified that it was still an illicit contraption. Had he already forgotten what they had learned? Even if a spell was not cast directly on someone, it could still cause indirect harm. And that fool was secretly trying to sell his rotten invention. That was why they needed to capture him. The explanation made sense to the other. As they closed in on him, Echo warned that whether he tried to fly or run, he would still end up finished by them. So why not save everyone the trouble? When he saw them rushing toward him, the man replied that he appreciated the offer, but he would pass. He cast a spell, and the area suddenly filled with smoke, making it difficult for the twins to see him. It turned out he had broken open a path and escaped into the Undercity. Etlin was not surprised by the route he took. That was a common escape path used by black market peddlers. Fortunately, he had smeared lapis juice on the man's cloak earlier. All he needed to do now was pop the fruit into a guidance orb to track him down. Just then, Lucy suddenly appeared behind them and said she would take it from there, which surprised them both. As she jumped into the hole, they warned her not to get close to that man. His contraption was extremely scummy. They then noticed Oniii-Chan behind them and told him he should stop her. However, he seemed uncertain and conflicted. He doubted there was any force in the world that could actually stop her. Below in the Undercity, the man was already panting heavily from exhaustion. He cursed the order and wondered how they had discovered him. He even suspected that one of his customers might have reported him. Still, he had no choice now. He had to hurry and alter the seal to destroy the evidence. If he erased the goods, it would not matter if he got caught. He could simply claim that they had arrested the wrong person. But when he looked at his creation, he hesitated. It was his best work after all. He had even named it the Garment Glimpse Glasses. It would be such a waste to destroy such a finely crafted piece. Not to mention all the money he could have made from selling it. He cursed the knights again, calling them a group of upright prudes. He said they could never admit that they liked things like this just as much as everyone else. He put the glasses back on, saying he would take one last look. But as he wore them, he suddenly blushed after noticing something unexpected. Unbeknownst to him, he had already been caught in the act. His entire body was suddenly bound, and Lucy declared that by the authority of the Knights Moralis, he was formally charged with the creation and possession of a small forbidden contraption designed to see through the clothing of unsuspecting people, as well as attempting to evade arrest. As punishment, his memories would be erased. The man asked if she was joking. He could not believe that his mind would be erased over something like that. He had not killed anyone. The magic itself was not even forbidden. However, Lucy replied that peeping was a form of sexual abuse, plain and direct. It should be treated with the same seriousness as any major crime. The man argued back, asking whether they did not have bigger things to worry about. There were far more serious crimes, he said. If someone only peeked for a moment, it did not really harm anyone. What was her problem, and why was she making such a big issue out of it? Lucy fell silent. A flashback appeared, showing her when she was still young. She was with a fellow apprentice named Ariane. They had just received good news, because a very special opportunity had appeared. Normally, apprentices were not allowed to handle requests outside the Great Hall without supervision. However, The lord of a castle in that region had generously offered to entrust them with a task. It would be their chance to gain real hands-on experience. Because of that, they were told they were very fortunate. Their master said he trusted them to treat their patron with respect. After hearing that, Ariane asked Lalusi if it was not exciting. It felt as though they were already grown up. For one day, they would become full-fledged witches. Lalusi smiled and agreed. They would do their very best. When the day of their assignment arrived, one of them could be seen struggling, and it was Lalusi. Someone was grabbing her hand, and she tried desperately to pull it away. She even fell to the floor when she finally broke free. She said they had come there to cast spells, so she could not understand why the man kept getting so close to them. He was always staring at them, or leaning over their shoulders just to smell their hair. Worst of all was the way he constantly touched them. Over and over, she thought about how much she hated it. She was frightened and knew she had to find their master and tell him what was happening. But suddenly someone called her name. It was Ariane, who was still inside the room with the man. She begged Lalusi not to leave. When Lalusi looked at her, she could clearly see the desperation in Ariane's eyes as she silently pleaded for help. She begged her not to leave her there while the man held her by the neck. Lalusi knew she could not abandon her, but she also needed to hurry and get help. Yet the moment she let that door close, everything would be over. If she left even for a moment, the two of them would be alone together. She wanted to run, but she could not. She knew Ariane needed her, so she told her to take cover. Ariane was shocked by what she was about to do. Suddenly, Lalusi shouted for her to get down. Then, without hesitation, she cast a spell, and the place exploded. Even from far away, the destruction it caused could clearly be seen. After they were reunited with their master, the patron claimed that he had merely bumped into them once or twice by accident, and that she had responded with excessive violence. He said he was deeply confused by the situation. He even began to suspect that perhaps the girls had simply been overwhelmed by the job and had invented a ridiculous story to distract attention from the quality of their work. Lalusi could not believe what she was hearing. She insisted that the patron was lying. However, their master replied that the patron had actually been very generous and had even suggested that if they simply offered a small apology for their behavior, he would be willing to forget the whole incident. Before he could finish speaking, Lalusi became furious. She declared that the patron was the one lying, and that she would never apologize to a pervert. Their master was shocked by her outburst. He told her there was no need to resort to calling him such offensive names. He asked her to calm down, stay quiet, and listen. But Lalusi refused and said she would not stay silent. She demanded to know why he was trying to cover up what had happened. Why was he pretending that they were the ones at fault? Why were they the ones expected to apologize? And why would he not believe them? By siding with that man, she said, he had become no different from an accomplice. Their master suddenly shouted for her to stop. Whatever the man may or may not have done to them was not the issue, he said. What mattered was that she had attacked and injured one of their important patrons. If they refused to accept his generous offer to forget everything in exchange for a simple apology, then he had no other choice. He warned her that once they returned to the Great Hall, he would take them directly to the Knights Moralis. Perhaps there she would learn her lesson. Lalusi was stunned by his words, but Ariane tried to reassure her that everything would turn out all right. As they were leaving, their master added one more remark, saying that even if the man had been somewhat touchy at times, it was not really harmful. So what was the big problem? In his opinion, Lalusi was the one with the real problem, and she should stop acting that way. Back in the present, when Lalusi remembered that moment, she told the man she had captured that he was the problem. It does cause harm. Slowly, it consumes the victims until they were completely broken. It strips them of their humanity. It steals their right to live without fear. It shatters their trust in witches and in everything they represented within society. Now that he understood the weight of his crimes, she declared her judgment upon him. She said that the principles must be upheld and that the penance of justice must remain protected. However, her capture penance suddenly broke. Lalusi was shocked to see the banner she was holding snap apart, the very one binding the man. The man laughed and said that with only a small adjustment, his spell that allowed him to see through clothing could now tear through it as well. The glasses he wore flashed as he mocked her, saying that her precious capture pennant could no longer save her. He challenged her to see how she would like it when she became the one truly exposed. But he failed to realize that Lalusi could still fight back. Even though the buttons of her clothes were forced open, she was fortunately still wearing undergarments. She told him that if he thought the knights relied only on their penance, he was mistaken. The man soon lowered his head, unable to resist any further. At that moment, someone arrived. It was Aesthis, who praised Lelucy for her excellent work. The culprit had never truly stood a chance. From time to time, people with twisted minds became bold, and contraptions like that appeared on the market. That was precisely why the punishment had to be severe, to send a clear warning and prevent others from doing the same. The man heard this and could not believe it. He asked if Aesthis was a man. He insisted that any man with blood in his veins would understand that he was merely satisfying a demand. He was simply providing a way for people to release it. That, he claimed, was the purpose of magic. He was only taking the dreams of ordinary people and making them real. But before he could finish speaking, Aesthis pointed his weapon directly at the man's face and told him not to flatter himself. No explanation would ever change the fact that the dreams of the abusers he served became nightmares for the victims they harmed. As Aesthis prepared to pass judgment and declared that the principles must remain protected and that the penance of justice must act swiftly against the guilty, Lelucy suddenly remembered something. Another flashback appeared from when she was young, when her master had taken her to the Knights Moralis. They heard Lelucy's master explaining why he had brought her there. He insisted that her anger had become completely out of control. He said that she was making a huge scene over a small misunderstanding. From the way she complained about it, anyone would think it was the end of the world. He claimed he could no longer tolerate it. According to him, she needed the authority of the knights. He asked whether they could clear her mind. He said that erasing only the most recent incident would be enough. But the young Aesthis said that there certainly was a problem, and that it involved both him and his patron. Lelucy was surprised when Aesthis suddenly declared that the principles must remain protected and that the penance of justice must act swiftly against the guilty. His penance shot straight toward Lelucy's master. The man was shocked and begged him to remove it from his body. He insisted that they had everything wrong, claiming that Lelucy was the real problem. He even asked if they had heard anything he had said. Venana added that the order delivered punishment to the guilty. Aesthis then stated that his apprentice was not the one who deserved the blame. Lelucy had not expected to hear those words. In the present, she could only smile. Now she worked alongside the very man who had helped her back then. They had said that his behavior had been unbecoming of a witch, and that the punishment given to him had therefore been justified. However, the man they had captured insisted that they should not do it. He suddenly said that he had just remembered something. If they erased his mind, they would lose a very important piece of information. Aesthis was surprised by this and demanded that he explain himself, warning that what he said had better be convincing. The man claimed that earlier that morning he had seen something important. While testing his glasses, he had caught sight of someone who truly deserved their attention. It was a man, and beneath his robe there was a seal carved into his chest. The man he was referring to was Dagda, and indeed, beneath his robe was a tattoo. He was in his rest, searching for Custis. He said that he needed to find him. Kifri was shown to be surprised when someone came to visit their tent. He said he was pleased to see him there. The visitor was none other than Knights Moralis member Aesthis. Kifri asked what business the order had with them at that moment. Aesthis then asked if there was anything unusual that should be reported. However, Kifri replied that he was sorry to disappoint him, but there was nothing. There was nothing at all. Aesthis said he understood and that it was good to hear that. He added that if anything were to change at any time, he hoped Kifri would use it. He tossed something toward Kifri, which caught him by surprise. Kifri wondered when he noticed the seal. The scroll was closed with lockwax. He began to wonder what might be inside it. After that, Aesthis turned and left, apologizing for the disturbance. Kifri tried to stop him, but Aesthis continued walking. Kifri called out his name and asked him to wait a moment. He then asked if the order was expecting some kind of trouble. Aesthis replied that of course not. If there were, then they would not be doing their duty. Because of that answer, Kifri was left puzzled. Meanwhile, inside the tent, Coco was completely amazed by what she saw. It was the newest product of the Starry Sword. She said they were the best and most amazing things she had ever seen. Tarta became embarrassed when he heard that. The items were the new seal scripting pens from Starry Sword. You simply choose a nib and any 3 segments to create a custom wand suited specifically for you. There were different types of end caps, barrels, nibs, and sections. According to Mr. Nalnoa, pens were the very best thing they produced at Starry Sword. Each one came with his personal guarantee. This year's designs were all made by Tarda, and they would surely attract a lot of people. Kifri was impressed and asked if he had really made all of them himself. He answered that he had. The perfect thickness and curvature of a pen, as well as its length and weight, were different for every user of magic. And since hands changed as a person grew older, Tarda had thought that if there were a wand whose parts could be freely replaced, it would allow everyone to always have the perfect pen for themselves. He was surprised to see the others simply smiling beside him. They all praised Tarda for his excellent work. They said it was a wonderful idea and even called him a genius. Mr. Nalnoa could not hide his pride in his grandson. They asked if they could try assembling one themselves, and even Kifri was tempted to buy a new pen for himself. Mr. Nalnoa allowed them to try it right there. Meanwhile, Tarda sat quietly in the back, deeply embarrassed. He said that amount of attention was already enough for an entire lifetime. Then he suddenly called Coco and handed something to her. He said he wanted to give it to her. It was the pen he had promised. When Coco accepted it and tried it, she said she had never felt anything like it before. It was perfect. It felt so natural in her hand, as if it had been shaped specifically to match her grip. Tarda explained that he had made the handle thicker than usual because he had noticed Coco tended to grip tightly whenever she focused her mind. He had trouble explaining it, but he thought it resembled the way Coco held a stone. Coco was surprised that he had noticed that. She could not believe Tarda had thought about making it that carefully just for her. Tarda shyly admitted that he had. He said that was where he got the idea for their newest product, customizable parts, so that each person could have the perfect fit. Coco paused when she heard that. Holding the custom wand Tarda had given her, she thanked him and promised she would use it well. She said she would draw so many seals with it, and that one day she would surely become a witch worthy of such a beautiful wand. Tarda blushed at hearing that. If Coco said it like that, he felt that he should be the one thanking her instead. Coco laughed and said it sounded just like something Tatia would say. Tarda wondered what Tatia had to do with it. Then he remembered to ask what kind of contraption Coco had made for the event. However, their conversation was interrupted when they heard Agat speaking. She was talking to their master Ali, Arujo, and could not believe she had not been allowed to join. She demanded a good reason why she could not participate in the Silver Eve procession. She said Arujo had seen how skilled she was at casting magic. Her abilities were more than enough to keep up with the older witches. She had already proven that she could create large and impressive spells. She even reminded him about the Bird of Light. She refused to let the matter go unless Arujo explained why he would not allow her to join the procession. Arujo replied that if she could not understand the reason herself, then that only proved his point. She was not ready yet. Agat complained that it was completely unfair. Arujo grew irritated and told her that if she really wanted to know why, it was because the procession was not about drawing attention to herself. Hearing that, Agat angrily stormed off. Kifri followed her and told her she should stay close to the tent, since it was not safe to wander off alone. Coco noticed that Agat looked extremely angry. Suddenly, Tatia appeared behind Coco and said she had been looking for her everywhere. She told her to hurry and come with her. She and Riche could barely handle everything anymore. She was certain Coco would not believe how many people had been drawn in by her magic. When Coco stepped outside the tent, she saw people floating in the air while using her contraption. Many others were waiting nearby for their turn to try it, watching in amazement. Coco asked what all of it was about. Tatia proudly replied that just as she had said, her spell had become incredibly popular with the crowd. She told Coco to look at the line. Riche was busy organizing the long queue of people and even held a sign to show where the end of the line was. Tarda was also surprised and asked what kind of spell Coco had brought. A child could be seen floating happily in the air. The child called out to her mother and asked if she could see her. She told her to look because she was flying. She said it felt like she had become a witch. The people watching were delighted by the sight. Coco then remembered the wing cloak they had designed for travel. She said she had tried using the seal from that design to create a contraption they could sell. Since it had taken so long to make, Master Kifri had suggested that she finish just a few and let people try it out. Even so, she had never expected such a huge response. Watching the crowd enjoying themselves, Tarda commented that the people seemed extremely happy. He He believed that everyone dreamed of flying through the sky at least once. When he finally received his silk shoes, he had also wanted to spend the entire day flying. Coco remembered the past. There had been a time when she only dreamed of flying using a cloak of flight with her newly washed blanket. Then she had finally managed to fly across the Dada range using her own magic. She looked at the people and said they really did look happy. That was exactly how she had felt back then. Tarda became curious about what she meant. Just then, a child ran toward them in a hurry. She thanked Coco and said she loved her contraption. When she grew up, she wanted to become a witch too. She asked her if she thought she could do it, if she could become a witch just like her. Instead of feeling happy, Coco felt something different when she heard that. She could not answer and simply froze there without any reaction. Tarda wondered about her response. Meanwhile, the child's family arrived and told her not to bother the witches with silly questions like that. They said one had to be born with special powers to cast magic, and that people like them were not the same. The child looked sad when she heard that. She asked if that meant she could never become a witch. What if she tried her very best to become one? Would she gain powers then? She said she wanted to become a witch and asked her father why it was not possible. Coco looked to the side as she listened to their conversation. Tatia noticed something was wrong and asked if Coco was okay, because she did not look well. Tarda then suggested that she sit down for a while. He invited her to find somewhere quiet first. So they stepped away from the tent and hid in a quieter place where there were barely any people around. Coco kept her head down and said she had always known that someday she would hear someone say those words. The kid reminded her of herself. They had the same dream, and she had cried because of it too. In the past, she often wondered what kind of answer she could give in that situation, but she realized she had none. She could not tell the child that becoming a witch was impossible for her, yet she also could not tell her that if she kept hoping long enough, it would eventually come true. There was no answer that worked. No matter which one she chose, it would only be a lie. She asked Tarda what she was supposed to do. She had experienced both sides now, and it felt like she was trapped between hope and hopelessness. She had learned that anyone could become a witch, yet she had also seen the terrible things that happened when magic was unleashed without limits. She could not stop her tears because she understood the child's pain, and she also understood why witches had rules. She asked which path was truly right when it seemed like there was no way out. She said everything about it hurt so much. Because of that, Tarda stepped closer and hugged her tightly to comfort her. He told Coco that she should not be the one carrying all that pain. Ever since that day on the hill, the same thoughts had been circling in his own mind as well. He felt guilty, as if he should have done more. Coco was surprised to hear that from him, but Tarda said none of it was their fault. They were not the ones who created those lies. Those burdens had simply been placed upon them. Coco said she knew that, but even so, Tarda replied that he understood. He only wished Custis could understand it as well. Before he could finish speaking, someone interrupted them. It was Custis himself, asking what he meant by that. He looked at them, and both of them were shocked to see him standing there. Coco was startled by Custis's appearance. He was standing there with strange legs. Tarda immediately asked what had happened to him and to his legs. Custis suddenly jumped forward to approach them. Tarda watched in curiosity, wondering how that had happened. He asked what kind of legs he was using. Coco also became worried. Neither of them had expected that he would be able to walk again, much less use his legs. However, Tarda remembered that the doctors had said it would take a very long time before that could happen. They had not even been certain he would ever fully recover. Coco grew concerned as she realized something. She wondered if it was forbidden magic. She asked where he had gotten it and how he had obtained it. Seeing the serious looks on their faces, Custis simply smiled and asked why they looked that way. Why were they so surprised? Magic could not heal legs, he said. They themselves had told him that before. Did they not remember? He pointed to his feet and explained that it only helped him move. A truly friendly witch had given it to him. In Tarda's mind, he thought he had never seen a spell like that before. But if it was simply something he wore, then it should be fine. He smiled and said it was good. He told him he was happy for him. However, Custis suddenly lifted his leg, and it began moving on its own and stretching outward. He asked him what he thought about that. Tarda was shocked. Custis asked if he liked it. It could stretch and bend, and it could carry him wherever he wanted to go. The strange leg wrapped itself around Tarda's body as he told him that those were his brand new magic legs. It seemed as though they were attached directly to his own body. Meanwhile, Coco, also bound, simply stared at him. Custis said it seemed Tarta felt relieved after seeing it. Tarta had even said he was very happy for him. Happy about what? He asked. Was he happy to hear that his real legs were still broken? Coco had not expected the bitterness in his words. Anger was clearly visible on Custis's face as he asked Tarta if that was what he was thinking. Because if his legs had truly been healed, that would mean someone had cast a forbidden spell on him. And that would be a huge problem, would it not? Tarta was shocked by what he said. He asked where he had heard that and how he knew about such things. Custis tightened the grip of his strange leg around him, nearly choking him as he struggled to breathe. Oops, he said. Was he not supposed to know about magic? Was that because he was an outsider? Because the two of them had been born as witches while he had not. They did not want him to know how he could help himself. Instead, he was supposed to keep hoping that someone like them would appear and help him someday, because that was the better way, was it not? That was what they believed, right? Tarta tried to explain, but Custis would not allow him to speak. He leaned even closer to him and said he had been wondering about something. All this time, they had something incredibly special that they could share with him. Yet for some reason, they only made him study herbs and alphabet letters. Was it because he was not trustworthy? Because he had been born on the streets and could not be trusted to use it properly? Were they afraid he would do something like that? He mockingly called that idea cute. Suddenly, the end of his strange leg sharpened, and he said it was a really good joke that they claimed they wanted to help him and had even thought up a spell for him. Then he attacked him, saying that this was what he deserved. Tarta raised his arms to protect himself. However, his attack did not continue because the legs suddenly broke apart. Custis looked behind him, and Tarta realized it was Coco who had done it. Coco held up her palm choir and focused on the spell attached to his leg. She said she had never seen a spell like that before, and Tarta had not either. None of the witches they knew would be able to use something like that even if they tried. Coco said she had already seen how frightening and unpredictable ancient magic could be. That was exactly why it was forbidden. She knew what happened when someone began casting spells they had never seen before or did not understand. It was extremely dangerous. Custis simply replied, "So what if it is dangerous?" Without hesitation, Custis kicked Coco, sending her flying across the ground. Tarta immediately became worried about what had happened to her. Custis then picked up Coco's witch hat and said that there was far too much commotion over such a small spell, one that simply allowed him to walk again. He asked where the danger in that was. Were they going to forbid something like that? And what about all the other dangerous things people still used because they were useful? What about fire or knives and swords? Even medicinal herbs could be turned into poison. How many people died from those things every single day? Yet people still continued to use them. He demanded to know who they were to decide which spells were worth the risk. Who were they to dictate who could use magic and who could not? Everything about it was a lie, he said. Every witch was a liar, and that included the two of them standing in front of him. With so many lies coming from their mouths, why should he believe even a single word they said? He lowered his head in anger. Tarta looked at him and said that he was right. Coco was shocked to hear that. Tarta continued and said that they had never wanted things to be that way. Witches had principles, rules that said they could not reveal everything. But in the end, he had been the one who chose to follow them. He apologized to Custis for hiding the truth from him. Perhaps he had not been a good friend after all. Custis fell silent for a moment, then suddenly jumped backward. Was he not even going to deny it? He asked. He understood that he was acting like a good little boy because his life had been on the line. He tossed Coco's hat toward them and said that he knew they would say anything now just to save themselves. But too bad for them, because he would not fall for their lies. Coco caught her hat and said that he was right about one thing. She had seen how much Tarta struggled. Tarta had tried to do everything he could and even more. All those times he brought Custis to the storehouse to teach him about herbs. Just by doing that, he had already broken the principles. Even so, he still did it, all for his sake. Custis paused and frowned. Coco continued, saying that both she and Tarta had done everything they did because they wanted to help him. And that was not a lie. She pleaded with him that if he would not believe anything else, then at least he should believe that. Tarta had not expected Coco to say that. Custis asked if they really wanted him to believe that they cared about him. At that very moment, a witch suddenly appeared behind them. A metallic band instantly snapped onto their wrists. Custis challenged them to prove their sincerity through their actions instead of their words. Coco and Tarta were shocked when they saw the band attached to them. They asked what it was and why they could not remove it. The witch calmly warned them not to try to open it. There was a proper way to remove it. If they attempted anything else, the band would tighten, and the heat and pressure would transfer the seal inside it from the steel directly onto their skin. Both of them became frightened when they heard that. When Coco asked who she was, the witch introduced herself as Onii-Chan. She said she already knew the two of them as Coco and Tarta. Immediately, Tarta stepped in front of Coco, placing himself between them in order to protect her. Onii-Chan then said that if they could prove they were truly friends, she would gladly remove the restraints. She knew those were not things that should be forced upon allies. But for now, they were not allies yet, so the restraints had to remain. Suddenly, Coco realized something. She said that Onii-Chan must be the witch who had given Custis his new legs. Tarta was shocked when she heard that, and Onii-Chan did not deny it. She said that Custis was now one of them, a new friend and ally. Why would she refuse help to a friend in need? She was simply giving him what selfish witches had failed to give. Custis then added that the two of them would help them. When Tarta asked what they intended to make them do, Custis replied by asking if that really needed to be asked. Onii-Chan then created a witch hat for Custis, and he declared that they would cut their precious chains of fate and crush all of it. The scene then shifted back to the festival. Tatia was annoyed while carrying a large crate. She was using the gloves of curious strength to lift it. She complained that all of them had agreed to help with Mr. Nalnoa's shop, yet she could not find any of them anywhere. She set the crate down and said she also wanted a break so she could explore the festival. Just then she noticed the brush buddy had wandered off and was reacting strangely. Tatia muttered that once the others returned, she would hand over everything that needed to be handled and leave the tent for them. However, she grew confused when she noticed Brush Buddy moving in circles. She walked closer and asked what was wrong. Was there something on the other side of the tent? When she opened it, she was surprised to see a young boy hiding there. Tatia greeted him with a friendly hello. Meanwhile, at the Starry Sword tent, Riche was thrilled after completely selling out the contraptions she had been offering. Orujo and Mr. Nalnoa were impressed by her achievement. Orujo could hardly believe it, since it was her very first attempt at selling a contraption and she had already sold everything. Mr. Nalnoa praised her and told her well done, saying it was an impressive success. Riche felt that now that she had discovered her true calling, it would only be a matter of time before the whole world recognized her name. Orujo could not help but react at her confidence. She had found her own niche, and he was willing to acknowledge that. He added that she had many choices ahead of her. She could create magic to meet the needs of patrons like him, or if she truly believed in herself, she could open her own magic shop and draw whatever she wished. Riche thought about the idea of owning her own magic shop, but she lowered her head when she remembered that she had promised herself she would continue studying many other things first. Mr. Nalnoa said that was indeed necessary. Orujo agreed and added that even skilled witches must keep learning. If she wanted his advice, it would be better for her to explore many different paths before settling into just one direction. That way, when she eventually returned to what she truly wanted, she would have gathered many new tools and experiences to use. At that moment, something sparkled in Riche's hand. She said that made sense. She had needed to study light magic in order to create the rings and bracelets she had made. She asked if she was on the right path, and Orujo replied that she was like a regular guidance orb. As they continued talking about the rings, Orujo suddenly wondered where the rest of their companions had gone. It had been quite a while since they left, and they had not returned yet. When Riche looked around the area, she agreed. Even Brush Buddy was nowhere to be seen. The scene then shifted to another tent. Brush Buddy stood there facing a black Brush Buddy, the two of them staring at each other. Tatia grew curious about the boy hiding there and asked who he was. The boy himself had not expected to see her either and wondered who she might be. Just then, castle guards passed nearby, saying they thought they had seen something in the area. When the boy heard that, he suddenly grabbed Tatia and pulled her inside the tent. She had not expected that at all. When she asked what was going on, he quickly told her to stay quiet because they would discover he was there. When Tatia noticed that he was not wearing a cap, she realized he was not a witch. A moment later, the castle guards arrived at the tent where they were hiding. When one of them opened the tent, they could not see anyone inside. When his companion asked if there was any trace of someone there, he said there was none, so they left to continue searching somewhere else. However, One of the guards still seemed puzzled, saying he was certain he had seen something there earlier. Inside the tent, it was revealed that Tetia and the boy had been hiding underneath. The brush buddy came out first. Tetia slowly lifted the staff and said it was fortunate she had brought her sand tent staff with her. She then looked at the boy and asked if he was all right. She apologized for getting his clothes dirty. She helped him stand up, and he replied that it was fine. He said he would have been in serious trouble if she had not helped him. Smiling, he thanked her for saving him and addressed her as the Lady Witch of the Dawn's first light. Tetia had not expected that and thanked him in return for his gratitude. However, she became curious about why he had mentioned Dawn's first light. When it seemed like he was about to get caught, she simply acted without thinking. However, Tetia asked why those men were actually chasing him. The boy replied that they were chasing him because he was someone worth chasing. That answer only confused Tetia even more. Suddenly, the boy straightened his posture and formally introduced himself as Aeolio Rest, the son of Diamraldi Rest, the supreme monarch of that peninsula. That meant he was the prince and heir to the kingdom of Zoza. Tetia was shocked by what she heard. She could not believe that he was a prince. Aeolio said he appreciated her reaction, but he asked her to lower her voice. When the guards nearby heard someone mention the prince, they immediately began searching the area. Meanwhile, the two of them quickly slipped away and ran toward another spot. They hid behind a bush while the castle guards continued searching for Prince Aeolio and called out for him to reveal himself. In a whisper, the prince told Tetia that it would be better if she avoided making loud reactions for now, since the reason was obvious. Tetia apologized and said she simply could not believe it. She wondered why a prince would be secretly running around like that. He asked if she really wanted to know the reason. When she said yes, he explained it to her. Tetia had not expected his answer. She had never imagined that a prince would want to walk around the festival and shop like ordinary people. Aeolio then asked if it was really that hard to believe. Tetia replied that yes, it was. He explained that the entire tradition of Silver Eve began as a way for witches to present their spells to the king. When a witch managed to include their spell in the procession, it almost guaranteed that they would be able to sell many copies of it to the royal family and other nobles. Because of that, Tetia had assumed that a prince would be able to buy any kind of magic he wanted at any time. However, the prince replied with a smile that the magic his father purchased was not for himself, but for the good of the nation. Magic existed to help the people, and even though he was a prince, that did not mean he was free to take whatever he wanted. As the brush buddies continued playing nearby, he admitted that the opposite was true for him. The things he wanted for himself were things he wished to obtain with his own hands. Tetia was surprised to hear that. She asked if there was a particular spell he was looking for. If he wished, she would gladly help him search for it. Aeolio paused for a moment and asked if she was really sure about that. If so, he said he did have a small request. Meanwhile, in another place, Kifri had caught up with Agad, who had stormed away earlier. He said they needed to talk, but Agad ignored him. Suddenly, Kifri was shocked by what he saw. He called out Agat's name and questioned what she was doing. Around Agat, sheets of paper covered in spells were burning with bright flames. She looked at him, and Kifri asked what she was burning. When he caught one of the papers, he realized it was the very seal she had been working on for weeks. He asked why she would just throw it away like that. Agat replied that it no longer serves any purpose. If the eyes of a certain person would never behold its beauty, then the spell meant nothing. Kifri said he understood. So when she joined the procession, it was not the king's attention she wanted, but that of the chief librarian of the Tower of Tomes, her mother, Adina Arklom. Agat explained that it was rare for librarians to leave the tower, but she had heard it was tradition for the chief librarian to appear on the night of the procession. It was their duty to observe the magic that would be added to the tower's collection and to watch for those worthy of becoming the next librarian. She said she needed to prove them all wrong. They had laughed at her. They refused to believe in her. She had been cast out from her own house, but they would regret it. Once she showed everyone that she could cast a magnificent spell, they would finally see what she was capable of. She could not stop her tears. She broke down, wiping them away as she cried. Kifri stepped closer, sensing the weight she carried. Agat looked up and said she already knew. She did not need him to say it. She knew she had only been thinking of herself. She also knew that from the very beginning, Master Ali would likely forbid it. He had already lectured her about not seeking attention, about remembering the true purpose of magic. As she tried to explain further, Kifri cut in and said that perhaps there was a deeper reason behind that caution than she realized. He picked up the scattered papers one by one and told her that while she may have been thinking of just a single pair of eyes while creating that magic, once it was part of the procession, many others would see it, and most of them would know nothing about her. Kifri said he knew how talented she was and how hard she had worked. He also believed that Ollie thought more highly of her than she assumed. But those qualities alone were not enough to make her a truly remarkable witch. Kifri asked if his assumption was correct that Agat did not consider a simple, everyday contraption to be a sufficient measure of a witch's true ability. Agat did not answer and simply stared off into the distance. Kifri continued, saying he could not deny that lighting a common lamp attracted far less attention than a serpent of flame soaring through the sky. And a simple vapor bubble that quietly gathered water for drinking and washing was not nearly as impressive as a massive vortex of water rising all the way to the clouds. However, in an era of peace like the present, a lamp and a bubble were far more likely to be used than a serpent or a vortex. Agat paused and thought about what he said. Kifri added that when a witch revealed their work to the eyes of the public, it was more important to consider not what they could do, but what they should not do. He said he was not belittling Agat's desire to prove herself, but he advised her to remember that the moment a witch lost sight of the true purpose behind what they created, they risked being led astray by the desires of those who would use them for their own benefit. To make sure that never happened, witches must always. Before he could finish, Agat interrupted him and asked what he meant. Led astray by whose desires, and used for whose benefit. The scene then shifted to another place where Tetia was with the prince. She asked if that was truly all he wanted. She said she would be happy to help. The prince, Aeolio as rest, replied that yes, that was perfect, as he wore Tetia's witch cloak and witch hat. He said that it had always been his dream to become a witch, even if it was just for a single day. He asked her how he looked and whether it suited him. Tetia answered that he looked dashing. If she did not know the truth, she would think he was a real witch. She added that it would surely be an excellent disguise for walking around the festival without being noticed. The prince looked delighted and said she was right. He was glad that she understood. He then commented that Tetia looked like a radiant spring princess with a cloak draped over her shoulders. Tetia had not expected that remark. She touched the cloak and noticed how beautiful the fabric felt. Aeolio reached out his hand toward her and called her his dear princess. He asked if she had ever thought that the clothes people chose to wear were a kind of magic as well. With something as simple as wearing them, a person could change who they were. Tetia was surprised by what he said, while Aeolio simply smiled at her, his hand still extended. Tetia became extremely excited and agreed, giving him a high five. She said that was exactly what she had been thinking too, and that it was incredibly cool. Because of that, she was certain they would get along well. Aeolio had not expected that reaction and began to blush. He ended up laughing, realizing that his gesture had been misunderstood. What he had actually meant was to guide her by holding her hand. To him, the situation had become rather amusing. Tetia grew annoyed at his laughter and asked if he was making fun of her. She asked what exactly she had done. The prince denied it and said it was nothing like that. He explained that for a long time he had heard people say that witches were not ordinary humans like the rest of them, but something entirely different. However, after speaking with her, he had seen a small spark of hope for a dream he once believed was impossible. Perhaps the idea that those who used magic and those who did not could someday become true friends was not so foolish after all. Tetia was surprised by what he said. Aeolio as rest lowered his head and thought that perhaps he had said something strange. He asked her to simply forget what he had said. However, Tetia stopped him and asked what he meant by that. Why would they not be able to become friends? They both believed that magic was wonderful, and they were clearly enjoying talking with each other. They had even shared a Teddy high five. There was nothing strange about that. Of course they could become friends. In fact, to her, they were already friends. It felt as though they had become friends from the very first moment they met. The prince was shocked and asked if she truly meant that. That he, a prince, and she, a witch, could really be friends. He said he could not express how happy he was to hear those words. If they were friends, then perhaps things could become just like the stories from long ago. A king and a witch, side by side. Together, an unstoppable pair. Tetia had not thought that far ahead. and the idea made her shiver slightly. Something about it gave her a strange feeling. The prince then invited her to come closer and told her not to call him Your Highness anymore. She should simply call him by his name now, because they were already friends. The scene returned to Khifri. He took out his palm choir and explained that magic was infinite. It was a wondrous and endless wellspring of power. It could be drawn upon again and again, and it would never run dry. But only witches possessed the vessel that could draw from those waters, and it was crucial that they never grant it to the ruler of that land, nor to anyone within the royal house of his rest, because the king of the peninsula was a man with 2 faces and 2 names. Suddenly, a hand covered in ink was shown. It belonged to none other than Dianraldi's rest, the king himself. While he was busy at work, his son suddenly ran toward him and embraced him tightly. The boy happily said that he had returned. The king looked surprised to see him. He had not expected him to come back before nightfall. He asked if he had already been satisfied with what he had seen during Silver Eve, and the boy replied that he had. He said he had already found what he was looking for. Now all that remained was discovering how he could obtain it. The prince then noticed the body lying in front of them. Placing his right hand over his chest, he remarked that it seemed his father had lost another specimen, or rather, another patient. He apologized that he had to witness such a sight. It should not have been like that, he said, if only the power of magic had been within reach of their people. The king simply looked at him in silence. The scene shifted back to Khifri, who continued explaining that King Dianraldi was also known by another name, the King of Life. He was a monarch who excelled in the science of life and death, the greatest master of the medical arts in their land, and the last heir of a very ancient and proud lineage renowned for its mastery of healing. That lineage, however, had been erased from history by their fellow witches on the day of the pact. The scene shifted back to Tatia. She continued thinking about the prince, Aeolio's rest. She thought that for most girls, meeting a prince would feel like a dream come true. Because of that, she began wondering why she had felt that strange shiver when he spoke about the friendships of ancient times. Even so, it was not right to say that 2 people could not become friends. She looked toward the castle and thought that just because he was a prince did not mean he could not befriend someone he liked. Meanwhile, Orujo looked outside and wondered why Tatia seemed so gloomy that night. Riche replied that she did not know either. Ever since they returned, everyone had been acting strangely. Orujo agreed with that observation. He then looked at Agat and mentioned how her mindset had suddenly changed. Now she planned to create a contraption instead. Agat confirmed that it was true. That was, if she could finish it before the festival ended. Master Khifri had told her that he would evaluate whether it could be sold, depending on what she managed to produce. Orujo responded that he understood. He said the same applied to him. If Agat managed to create a solid contraption, he promised that he would take a look at it as well. Agat had not expected that and thanked him, saying he was very kind. Meanwhile, Khifri was quietly sitting off to the side. Then Coco stepped out of the doorway and called his name. Khifri looked surprised that she was still awake and asked if she was feeling all right. Tatia had mentioned that she seemed a bit unwell earlier. Coco replied that she was fine. Actually, there was something she wanted to ask him. The truth was that she had been wondering if she might be allowed to perform in the procession. Agat overheard her words and immediately glared at her. "Excuse me," she reacted. Was she joking? She asked herself in disbelief. Coco could hardly believe that she was not being allowed to participate. Concern was clearly written on her face when she heard that she would not be permitted to join. Meanwhile, Khifri admitted that, to be honest, he was not certain whether her contraption was ready to be sold yet. Coco asked again if there was truly no way for it to happen. Khifri then asked if the contraption she was referring to was called the wing cloak. He examined it and remarked that it certainly looked impressive when it was tethered to the ground, and the people at the festival seemed to love it. However, if it were to fly freely, what would happen if a strong gust of wind suddenly caused the user to lose control, or if it drifted too close to a Pegasus or even a dragon? Contraptions that posed serious risks had to be reviewed by the wise in friendship before they could be approved for general sale. Coco listened carefully to his explanation. Khifri added that she was indeed qualified to join the procession, but if he were being completely honest, he doubted that her contraption would pass the inspection. Hearing that made Coco visibly saddened, while Agat, sitting nearby, felt a small sense of relief. She immediately questioned herself about why she even cared. Suddenly, Coco pulled out several sheets of paper filled with spells and asked if she could submit other ideas for consideration instead. One by one, she laid them out in front of Kifri, who immediately advised her to calm down first. He explained that some of them showed potential, but suggested that she should slow down for the moment. She could start by selling contraptions at the tent first. However, Coco insisted that she needed to have something included in the procession because if she did not then, she abruptly cut herself off, pulling back from her sudden burst of energy and saying that she simply really wanted to join it. Tarda stepped out when he heard that. Coco quickly walked away, saying she would think of more spells and come back once she had something ready. Kifri was surprised by her reaction and called after her, asking her to wait for a moment. He could not believe that it had happened again. It had been like that the entire day. Every time he tried to talk to one of his apprentices, they ended up running away from him. The others nearby were also confused by what had just happened. Agat then began to reflect on the strange sense of relief she had felt earlier. It was almost as if she had been glad that Coco ran into trouble trying to join the procession. She shook her head at that thought. Of course, no one could simply enter the procession that easily. Having a spell included there required tremendous effort. But beyond that, she found herself wondering why Coco had suddenly become so determined to be part of it. A few hours earlier, during the conversation with Custis, he had told Coco and Tarda that they had to find a way to participate in the Silver Eve procession, something that shocked both of them. As they already knew, no magic could be used within the walls of Castle as Rest. The selling of any contraption displayed during the procession took place at the seaside pavilion just behind the postern wall. According to him, this was the only moment when a witch of no high status could approach His Majesty, King d'Emeraldi's Rest, without arousing suspicion. They would be the ones to open the path to the pavilion, and they would invite them to come there. Onii added that, in simple terms, they would help them get close to the king. Coco could hardly believe what she was hearing when the king was mentioned. Tarda then asked what they planned to do to the king once they were face to face with him. Onii replied that they had no intention of harming him. Their goal was simply to. But before she could finish speaking, Custis stopped her. He said that was enough. They did not need to explain anything to them. All they had to do was make sure they managed to face the king. Coco looked at them and began thinking deeply. Custis added that he knew it would not be difficult for witches like them. They only needed to do what witches normally did. The king loved those kinds of magical contraptions that helped ordinary people. And besides that, whatever magic they created would also help him, so they could even feel good about what they were doing. After saying that, he flew upward and told them not to disappoint him. They should remember that the three of them were now bound together by fate. With that, he suddenly vanished like a bubble bursting into nothing. The remaining Coco and Tarda were left completely stunned by his sudden disappearance. Back in the present, concern was evident on the faces of Coco and Tarda as they walked through the festival. Tarda asked Coco what she planned to do now. Was she going to create a new spell? It seemed that way, Coco replied. Master Kifri had told her that the wing cloak could not yet be sold as it was. She would need to think of something that could pass the approval for the procession, but there was not much time left. Tarda responded that he had not even finished his first test yet, so he could not submit anything either. He apologized to Coco because the pressure for it had fallen on her. Coco told him that it was all right. However, she began wondering how everything had ended up like this. It was supposed to be a festival. They should have been enjoying the magic and having fun, yet instead it felt as though they were separated from everyone else, trapped in their own little world. As they walked down the stairs, Coco asked whether he thought they should tell Master Kifri and Master Ollie everything that had happened. But she was afraid of what might occur if they explained everything. Tarda said that could not happen. Yes, the masters might help them, but there was no telling what they would do to Custis. Most likely they would hand him over to the Knights Moralis, or erase his memories and strip him of his magic. If things went badly, even their own memories of him might be erased. Coco insisted that they would not do something like that, but Tarda asked if she was really sure. Coco admitted that she was not certain, yet said they still had to think about it, especially regarding the woman with him, Onii, or whatever her real name might be. Tarda replied that it was obvious she was a brimmed cap. The fact that Custis was involved with someone like her meant there was no chance the adults they knew would protect him. Because of that, they had to keep it a secret. He pleaded with Coco. Even so, Coco still hesitated. Then she said that she would try to find Custis again. Suddenly, Someone appeared behind her while they were speaking and said that if everyone would just calm down and talk things through properly and take the time to say what was truly on their minds, she was sure they could. Before she could finish what she was saying, the man suddenly reached out and grabbed Coco. Tarda was startled and immediately worried for Coco, telling the man to take his hand off her. However, the man told them to stop and warned them not to go any farther. Beyond those stairs was the muck pool, a place that was not safe for children to wander into alone, even for witches like them. He then called Coco and Tarda by their names. When the light fell across his face, they realized that it was Dagda, the man who had taken Custis in. Dagda explained that the dirty water from the homes of the Crown City flowed through canals toward the edge of town, where it passed through sewer grates that were cleaned by magic so the water could be purified before returning to the river beyond the gates. However, no matter how clever that system was, every grate in every city had a place where filth gathered and rotted. Not only garbage, but people as well. The city threw away those it did not want there, and they built shanties amid the filth. He pointed toward the muck pool, and Coco looked at it in shock. Dagda walked with them and said that the place was filled with danger, and it was a place that Custis knew all too well. He had thought that he might find him there, though he had not expected to run into the two of them instead. Tarda then asked whether Custis was no longer with him. Dagda lowered his hood and said that was correct. He remembered that they had left Caln together, and the next thing he knew, he had awakened in the Crown City. It seemed that he and Custis had become separated along the way. He admitted that he was worried about him. In the whole world, Custis was the closest thing he had to family. Tarda then realized that Dagda was right. When they were still in Caln, Custis had said almost the same thing. Dagda was surprised and asked if Custis had truly said that. He lowered his head, hardly able to imagine hearing such words from him. In truth, Dagda himself had also come from the muck pool. His life had been harsh back then, and he had done many things he was not proud of, but those had been the only ways he knew to survive. One day, he secretly slipped into a traveling troupe of entertainers to see what he might be able to steal. When he was caught and tied up, he thought it was the end for him. Instead, they placed a round lute in his hands and taught him how to play it. An old woman told him that music gives a person a way to live using nothing but their body, voice, and mind. If he wished to steal, she said, he should take skill rather than belongings. The flute he had wanted to steal would earn far more coins if he could actually play it. The woman who taught him had also grown up in the muck pool. In return for everything she had taught him, she asked for only one thing. Before he left this world, he had to help another child born in the muck pool. Saving just one life would be enough repayment. At the time, he had been young and had thought the woman a great fool. But now, after meeting Custis and passing music on to him, he could say that it was the one truly meaningful thing he had ever done in his life. As he remembered the moments they had shared, Dagda said that Custis was his son, not by blood, but he would carry on everything he had. Custis was the child that fate had given him, just as fate had given Custis two friends who cared about him. Tarda held the bangle on his wrist and said that he was glad to know Custis had a father like him. Dagda was surprised to hear that. Suddenly, Coco said that she wanted to hear his music. She wanted to hear him play, and Tarda agreed. Dagda had not expected that request, but he said that nothing could make him happier. He took out his round lute and said that perhaps if he sang with all his heart, the melody might reach Custis's ears. He would sing the works of witches from ancient times. As he prepared to play, Coco suddenly noticed something that deeply troubled her. She tugged on Tarda's clothes, and he asked what was wrong. Coco simply told him to look. When Tarda looked, he too became alarmed. They could hardly believe what they were seeing. There was a seal engraved on Dagda's chest. While Dagda began playing and singing, someone else heard his music. It was a member of the Knights Moralis, Galga. He stopped when he realized that he had heard that melody before. While Dagda was busy playing, the sound of his music reached the festival. Galga grew restless as he listened to the singing. He was certain he had heard that voice before. Just then, his companion arrived carrying a drink and said he had bought his favorite beer. As he handed it over, he became concerned by the look on Galga's face. He recognized that expression. It was supposed to be his day off, yet he had already slipped back into work mode again. He asked what was going on. Galga apologized to a twert. The singing he was hearing had him thinking. He could not pinpoint exactly what it was, but he knew he had heard that voice before. He was trying to remember where. A twert asked if he meant a minstrel's song. They had probably heard a dozen like that while walking around. Maybe he was just remembering the tune from Silver Eve last year. But Galga shook his head and said that was not it. He had heard it much more recently. As he was about to raise his beer and take a drink, something suddenly clicked in his mind. He stood up immediately and said it came from the staircase river, the father of the boy they had lent the seal chair to. He remembered that Lalusi had mentioned something about it in her latest report. She had wondered why they had bothered returning the chair when the boy no longer needed it. He had been hoping to see them at the festival so he could follow up on what had happened at the river and learn how much the boy had seen. Galga apologized to his companion and said that something urgent had just come up. He would return after passing the matter on to the other knights. Atort did not object, saying he never really knew what to do with him anyway. He allowed Galga to go and said he would wait for him there. He added that he should hurry and come back soon. Back at the muck pool, the reactions of Coco and Tarda looked unusual while Dagda was singing. Because of that, he stopped playing and became concerned. He said it seemed they did not like the song very much. He explained that it was a famous tune among ordinary people, though perhaps to witches it might sound somewhat exaggerated in the way it described the great deeds of their ancestors. He apologized if it did not match their own experiences very well. However, Tarda said that was not the reason. In fact, the song itself was not the problem. Dagda was surprised to hear that. After all, they certainly did not look pleased while listening to a beautiful melody. So he asked what the problem really was. He lowered his instrument and said that as a performer, it hurt him to see his listeners unhappy. He asked if he was at fault and said he was open to any criticism. The two stepped closer and Coco called out to him, but Tarda stopped her from saying more. Even so, she mentioned the tattoo on Dagda's chest. He asked if Dagda knew the meaning of that tattoo and whether he understood the power it carried. Dagda was startled when he heard them mention the tattoo. He looked down at his chest and realized that was what had been troubling them. He admitted that he had absolutely no idea about it. When he woke up, it had already been there on his body. Then Coco asked about the loot. She explained that during the flood at the Staircase River, it had been swept away by the water. So how had he gotten it back? Did he remember? Dagda said that was a good question, but he did not know when he had gotten it back either. As far as he could remember, it had simply always been with him. Thinking about it now, he was also wondering what had happened between Kaln and his rest. How had he ended up there? He did not know, and he could not remember. Everything felt hazy. Ever since he arrived there, and even before that, it felt as though his memories were missing. Tarda realized that Dagda's mind was in disarray. He was certain that someone had erased his memories. Still, that meant Dagda had most likely not placed that seal on himself willingly. Coco then said that of course he had not, because the seal on his chest was a counterclock spell. Tarda was shocked to hear that, as he had never heard of such magic before. Suddenly, Dagda remembered that he had been searching for Custis. The two children were startled. Dagda himself seemed confused about what had happened to them and to him. Custis was probably there somewhere, and he must have seen everything. Dagda was worried and needed to make sure he was safe. He began walking and said he had to find him immediately. There was no time to waste. The two children looked at each other. Coco then said that she did not think Dagda needed to worry about Custis. He was probably fine. If anyone was in danger, she believed it was Dagda. Dagda stopped when he heard that and asked what she meant. Suddenly, someone leapt down from above. It was a member of the order, Galga. He immediately attacked Dagda with tremendous force, shattering the ground beneath them. The people nearby were startled when they saw the destruction caused by the impact. Dagda managed to dodge the blow, but he could not understand what was happening. He asked who the man was and what he wanted, while telling Coco and Tarda to stay behind him. Coco gasped when she realized who the man was. She recognized him from the Staircase River. He was one of the Knights Moralis. When the dust finally settled, Tarda forced his eyes open to look at him and was shocked when he realized he was from the Order. Of all times, why did he have to appear now? Galga said that he had followed the voice, expecting to find an ordinary minstrel. Instead, he had discovered a serpent marked with a seal upon its skin. Gripping his weapon, he rushed forward again. However, Dagda drew his sword to defend himself. Galga ordered him to move away from the children, calling him a brimmed cap enemy. Dagda was shocked to hear that. As he continued attacking, Galga admitted that he did not know what kind of dark powers Dagda was hiding, but taking innocent children hostage was too low, even for people like them. He then declared the sentence and said that the principles must always be preserved, and that the justice of the penitent must be swift against those who had sinned. Dagda struggled to fend him off and was forced to retreat. He could not understand what Galga meant by those principles, nor why he was being called guilty. He said he had no idea what was happening. Curious, he asked if the man was also a witch and turned to Coco to ask if he was their friend. He could not understand why the man had suddenly attacked him. Coco replied that yes, he was a witch, but he was not their friend. He was a knight of the order, one of the Knights Moralis, a group that judged witches who broke the rules. Coco quickly placed down her notebook and cast a spell, causing the ground to rise up and form a barrier between them. Taking the opportunity, Tarda pushed Dagda and urged him to run. He said Dagda could not be captured by the knight. The tattoo on his chest was a violation of their principles. He would not be given the chance to explain. They would certainly assume the worst. Galga was alarmed when Coco's wall suddenly rose between them. Dagda then asked Tarda why. Was that the kind of justice witches followed? Coco grew troubled when she heard that. Dagda added that they were saying he would be punished for that mark even though he did not know what it was or how it had appeared on him. Coco replied that she knew it sounded terrible, and they felt the same way. However, she could not finish her sentence because Dagda suddenly realized something. He quickly grabbed Dagda's instrument and pulled the two children along with him. He apologized to them and said that they were not the ones who deserved his anger. They could talk about it later. For now, they needed to run. Even he could see that someone who attacked without warning was clearly not interested in having a conversation. At that moment, the wall separating them suddenly exploded. Coco was alarmed when she saw that her wall of earth had been destroyed. Galga could not understand why they were defending him. He recognized Coco from the Staircase River and began wondering if Aesthis had been right all along in his suspicions. Perhaps they truly were connected to the brimmed caps. He refused to believe it and thought that they must simply be under someone's control. Who knew what kind of forbidden magic had been used to corner them like this? If he was facing countless unknown spells, then the safest course of action was to eliminate every uncertain variable. He quietly prepared his palm choir behind his back and cast a spell. With it, he snatched the lute from Dagda's hands. Dagda was shocked by what had happened. Galga believed that his suspicion had been correct. Based on Dagda's reaction, he assumed it was a weapon disguised as a lute. He examined it carefully, thinking that a seal must have been drawn upon it. He tried to determine what kind of magic they were dealing with. After a moment, he was startled to find a counterclock seal. That was when he realized that it was not a weapon after all. Dagda pleaded for him to return it. He said it was the only thing he had left, that it meant everything to him. Suddenly, he remembered Custis shouting his name. Pain shot through his body. Without warning, he coughed up blood and remembered the moment when Custis had been crying and begging him not to die, pleading with him not to leave. Overwhelmed by pain, Dagda dropped to his knees. Galga became alarmed when he realized that the mark on Dagda's chest might also be a counterclock spell. That could not be possible. Why would he do something like that? He hurried toward him and ordered everyone to lay down their weapons and surrender. There was no time to waste. Dagda needed to see a doctor immediately. However, before anything else could happen, Custis suddenly rushed in from behind him. Moving quickly with his long, sharp tendrils, he struck Galga and knocked him to the ground. Galga had not even noticed him approaching. The impact left him severely injured. Galga recognized him as the boy with the seal chair. But only moments later, he lost consciousness. Tarda had never expected to see Custis there. Custis told them to stay away from him. He was clearly furious, saying that this had happened again. Holding his wand, he complained about how many times he had to redraw it. Tarda looked toward Coco and asked what was happening. What exactly was a counterclock seal, and why was everyone so upset about it? She remembered the explanation from Master Kifri. A counterclock spell was a useful kind of magic that simply granted a few extra moments. Like when it had been used on her broken ink pot, it rewound time for the bottle of ink. It would last perhaps a day at most, just enough time to pour the ink into another bottle. But one must not misunderstand it. The fate that befell the pot had never truly been avoided. It had only been delayed. The fact that it had fallen and shattered had not changed. Once time caught up to that moment again, the pot would meet the same fate. That was all a counterclock seal could do. Tarda was deeply troubled when he heard that, because if that was the magic carved into Dagda's chest, then it meant it would not last forever. Custis answered desperately that he already knew. He had been bringing Dagda back that way again and again, ever since the morning they left Kaln, all the way until the moment he died. Custis had truly believed that, this time, they would finally be saved. He had been convinced that they had already escaped the cruel fate that had been chasing them. In a memory from before they arrived in his rest, Dagda was startled when he saw that his broken instrument had suddenly been repaired and restored. He asked Custis how it had happened, and even Custis himself was amazed. He realized that all he had needed to do was draw, and he could use magic as well. With magic, he could hunt and obtain fresh water as if it were nothing. He no longer had to worry about the cold or fear storms and wild beasts. As he thought about it alone, Custis began to understand why witches seemed so gentle and carefree. It was no wonder their eyes were always filled with hope when it came to life. How could they not be when they possessed the power to do anything they wished? But eventually, he learned the truth. The miracle did not last. He could not believe it when he saw Dagda collapse once again. He had brought him back to life, yet he was lost again just the same. Custis drew the seal again, crying and trembling as he wondered why it had happened once more. He clung to Dagda's body and asked why it kept happening again and again. Then he turned to Onii-Chan and said that no matter how many times he drew the seal, he always returned to the same moment, the moment Dagda died. Custis's heart was shattered. The only thing Onii-Chan could say was that she was sorry. That art was not perfect, not yet. The true potential of magic had been lost on the day of the pact, when the pointed caps sealed away the most important spells. The power to fight, the power to change one's form, and above all, the power to heal. She explained that the brimmed caps were striving to restore the spells of ancient times. And one day, they would succeed. All it would take was time. They would obtain the power to defy fate itself, no matter the cost. Custis wondered what she meant by defying fate. Did it mean being freed from it? At that moment, a brimmed cap asked if that was what had captured the young Custis's interest. The witch asked whether he wished to help them and join their side. In that moment, driven by desperation, Custis chose the path that led him to where he stood now. In the present, as Coco explained what she had learned from Master Kifri, she said that the counterclock seal was nothing more than a temporary and futile struggle against the unchanging flow of time. Food would inevitably spoil. A cracked ink bottle would eventually shatter completely. Everything was destined to reach the fate already set for it. It was a battle they could never win. Fate would always be waiting when the clock returned to that moment. When Tarta heard that, he finally understood why Mr. Dagda could not remember what had happened. He had no idea how he had arrived in his rest or why his round flute had been repaired. That was because it was not only his body that had been turned back in time, but his memories as well. Custis could only cry in pain. Meanwhile, Coco asked if that meant Dagda had to remain in that state forever. He would never be able to move forward, forced to repeat the same day over and over again, trapped within that cycle all alone. That was why a counterclock seal should never be drawn on someone's skin. The price of saving someone that way was simply too great. Custis, furious, asked what her idea was then. Was she saying he should have simply allowed his father figure to die? What did he care about the cost? What did it matter if it was dangerous? He shouted and admitted that all he wanted was for Dagda to keep living. If he stopped drawing the seal, it would fade, and Dagda's body would begin to bleed. That could not happen. He would never allow it. His new friends had told him that someday they would find it, the way to fight against fate. And until that day came, he would be the one to ensure Dagda remained safe. He would never let him die. He would never allow that. Then he suddenly stopped, noticing something. He told Coco to stop. She was sobbing, and he demanded to know who had given her the right to cry. Coco apologized. She said it just hurt too much to see something like that. As she wiped away her tears, she admitted that she was sad. She was hurting as well, because none of it was Custis's fault, yet he was the one forced to suffer. They should have been the ones to tell him about magic, and about how dangerous it was to draw spells he did not understand, or spells he had no idea how to use. And now things had reached this point. It was simply too much for her to bear. She could not accept it. In her mind, Coco saw herself in Custis. He had made the very same mistake she once made. He had reached out and taken the pen without knowing anything about it, with no one and nothing there to stop him from the tragedy that followed, just like her. If she had known about the counterclock seal back then, She was certain she would have used it on the day her mother turned to stone. She probably would have reached for the solution right in front of her without thinking, without considering the price or the terrible consequences it might bring. Even good magic could cause harm, just like plants that turn poisonous when placed in the hands of someone without enough knowledge. Coco kept apologizing to Custis again and again. She said she had not realized it before, but they were the same. That was why she was sorry. She told him she was willing to apologize forever if necessary, but she asked him to give her a chance. She wanted to find a way to help him. Custis was taken aback by that, but Coco added that she did not mean a way that relied on forbidden magic, not a method that carried a terrible price. She meant the right way, a good way. Custis grew even more irritated. He said she was crying and apologizing, and now she was acting as if everything would end in a happily ever after. That kind of ending was impossible. But Coco replied that whenever there was something she could not do, she tried to turn it into something she could do, because she had to. Custis was about to respond, but Tarta stepped in between them. He told them to wait a moment and asked if they could not see the most obvious solution. Both of them turned to him. Tarta asked if they were not trying to save Dagda's life. If that was the case, why were they focusing only on magic when there might be other ways? There were people who could do things that they themselves could not. In fact, there were many of them in the city. They did not understand what he meant, so Tarta clarified that he was talking about doctors. They were surprised to hear that. Tarta explained that when he had been in the hospital in Calm, he had overheard something astonishing. People were saying that the very best doctor was in his rest, and that doctor was none other than the king of the peninsula. Coco wondered if he meant the king of Zoza. They would be able to see him during the procession. If they could somehow persuade him to help Dagda at the exact moment the spell ended, then they might be able to save him. They would no longer have to rely only on the counterclock seal. Custis, curious, asked if that would truly mean he could finally be freed from the cycle. The two of them looked at him. Tarta said that perhaps, to him, it felt like they were once again twisting everything for their own sake. Whether there were principles or not, he knew they had hidden the truth about magic from him, and because of that, they had never warned him about the dangers of forbidden spells. And now, here they were again, saying they wanted to help. Custis did not respond. Tarta continued, saying he did not expect to be forgiven. He was not doing this to ease their conscience either. All he wanted was to see Dagda recover, and he added that it was not right if the way to save him came with a terrible cost. Before he could even explain further, Custis said he already knew why. Because they believed that magic existed to make people happy. He shook his head and called it a load of crap. The two of them had not changed at all. In their heads, the world was still nothing but blue skies and sunny days. He stood up and said that if they wanted to waste their time looking for a doctor, they could do whatever they wanted. He did not care. He then dragged Dagda's body using the mechanism attached to his leg and said that what mattered was making sure they had a place in the procession. Right after that, he suddenly disappeared. Tarta remained silent, while Coco asked what that was about. He found it strange, since Custis was a minstrel. Wasn't it weird that in all his travels, and with all the songs he had gathered, he had never once learned about what the king had done? The scene then shifted to inside the castle, where the king was simply sleeping beside his whisker cats. If Custis truly did not know, and if the brimmed caps were trying to get close to the king, then Tarta said he was curious about their true objective. Coco admitted she could not imagine it either. All she knew was that they needed to be careful. Tarta agreed, and the two of them left the place. Meanwhile, Custis moved to another place while carrying Dagda with him. He thought about what they had said about a cure that came without a price. He wondered if such a thing was truly possible. Meanwhile, back at the place where the confrontation had occurred, Inania, who had been flying above, noticed that the knight Morales, Galga, was still lying on the ground. She said it was fortunate. He was still in the same place where Custis had left him. If news about their presence there spread, or if word of Coco and Tarta's involvement reached others, it would become a problem for them. So she landed and approached him. She told him that in order to prevent that from happening, she regretted that she would have to ask him to forget his memories. However, Galga, who was still barely conscious, pleaded with her not to do it. The seal she was referring to was the same one they used to erase from criminals' minds any trace of magic. Inania replied that of course it did. For a witch who had been born and raised surrounded by the art of magic, there was no memory that was not entwined with it. She reached for her palm choir and said that, For him, that spell would be no different from completely erasing his mind. What a waste. How tragic. She offered her sincere apology. However, she added that she was merely doing what had always been done. The pointed caps loved erasing anything that inconvenienced them and pretending that the people they erased had never existed at all. What she was doing now was no different from what they themselves did. She even asked him that if it were a brimmed cap begging instead, would he stop his hand? If he was truly troubled by what she was doing, then perhaps he should reflect for a moment on his own actions. In the end, she used her magic and said farewell to him, even calling him Dear Knight. Galga lost consciousness as he weakly told her not to cry. He said that he was sure she would have many companions, because there were already countless others whose memories had been stolen by someone else. A few moments later, two witches came running to the very place where Galga had left a twort. It was Tarda and Coco, and they accidentally collided with the twort. Because of that, he scolded them to slow down and watch where they were going. They quickly apologized and said it had only been an accident. But when a twort put on his glasses, he could not help but feel uneasy. He wondered where Galga had gone. The scene then shifted to the Order's tent, where worry was clearly visible on their faces after Galga had been brought there. The witch who had delivered him explained that he had found Galga lying near the muck pool, and when he discovered him, he was already in that condition. Senosha was tending to his wounds, while Aesthis could not hide his concern. He asked if there had been any witnesses. The injuries suggested that Galga had been attacked, and he doubted that such a fight would have been quiet. The man replied that Aesthis could not be serious. It had happened in the muck pool. At the first sign of trouble, the people living there would immediately scatter and keep their mouths shut. That was likely why Galga had not been discovered right away. Aesthis then turned to Galga and asked if he recognized who he was. Galga only shook his head. When he was asked whether he recognized himself, he shook his head again. Utawin then called Aesthis and pointed toward the man who had found Galga. It was a twort, and they asked him to recount what had happened once more. A twort agreed. He explained that Galga had been acting somewhat strangely earlier. He had heard a melody, a song that he said sounded familiar to him. A moment later, Galga said he had something to take care of and walked into an alley. Aesthis asked what kind of song it was. A twort replied that it was simply a minstrel's song. He also mentioned that Galga had brought up the staircase river. Lalusi was surprised when she heard that. She mentioned the river near Calm and wondered if it might have something to do with the child who had returned the seal chair. Aesthis asked Lalusi if she knew anything about it. She admitted that she had no solid evidence, but there was one possibility that had come to mind. A twort suddenly spoke and said that according to Galga, he was supposed to return right away. However, after some time passed, he became worried and went looking for him. When he finally found Galga, he did not even recognize him anymore. Because of that, he was deeply concerned about what would happen to him now. He wondered if the memories that had been stolen from him could ever be restored. Someone explained that it seemed Galga had lost all knowledge related to magic. There would now be gaps in his mind regarding even the simplest aspects of their way of life, which would surely make it difficult for him to continue living as a witch. Lalusi then addressed Captain Vanana. She spoke to a twort and explained that after Galga recovered at the Healing Spire, he would be sent to Adonli, the Isle of Oblivion. A twort was shocked when he heard the name Adonli and asked if it was some kind of joke. That was the island where discarded witches were sent. It was a place meant to prepare those who had committed offenses to live outside the world, after the magic in their memories had been erased. He asked if they truly intended to turn Galga into an outsider. He could not believe it. There had to be another way. If there was a seal capable of erasing memories, then there must also be a way to restore them. Perhaps there existed a secret spell that only the knights or the wise ones were permitted to use. He pleaded with them, saying they surely knew of some way to fix this. But Vanana said there was none. Magic that restored the mind belonged to the domain of healing craft. When it came to forbidden magic, there were no heavier or lighter crimes. All were equally forbidden, and that principle formed the foundation of their laws. In rare cases, some erased memories might return on their own. But given Galga's condition now, they should not place too much hope in that. Hearing this, a twort collapsed to his knees. He could not believe it. Because of the principles, they were willing to cast aside a life. He said Galga was very important to him, and he is their comrade. There might still be traces within his mind that could help identify who had done this. Was that not reason enough to make an exception? Suddenly, the sound of a staff striking the ground echoed, startling Atwart. It was Aesthis. He declared that there could never be an exception. He would not hear anyone questioning their principles again. Those were not matters for them to decide. Someone then approached and called Aesthis by name. It was Captain Venana, who told him it would be better for him to remain silent and not say too much. She then apologized to Lord Atwart, but according to regulations, Galga could only be entrusted to the care of a master, an apprentice, or a family member. They pushed Atwart outside and told him they were grateful for the help he had given. Atwart was surprised because there was still so much he wanted to say. However, they told him that if he remembered any other details, he should simply inform them. After that, he was escorted out of the tent. Utawin sympathized with him. He said he felt bad for him. Even so, Atwart still could not believe what he had heard. He could not accept that they were going to do that to Galga, to send him to the Isle of Oblivion. Did they not have any hearts at all? Even if they had already given up on Galga, he would not abandon him. He stormed off and declared that he would find a way to restore Galga's memories. They only needed to wait. Utawin could hardly believe that Atwart had accused them of having no hearts. The twins then peeked over and asked if they had heard what he said. They replied that if one asked them, it did sound a bit heartless. Surely he did not think they were not angry about the situation. Utawin placed his hand on the twins' heads and said that it was not just anger they felt. They were furious. As Galga sat there quietly resting, his companions swore that they would find the brimmed cap responsible for what had happened to him, and that person would pay for it. Inside the tent, the faces of the Knights Moralis were deadly serious as they thought about the fate that had befallen their comrade. The scene then shifted to the Starry Sword pop-up shop, where Tetia and Riche were thrilled with the number of customers they had that day. They said they had sold so many items again. Riche admitted that running a magic shop was actually really fun and felt like something that truly suited her. Good, said Mr. Nulnoa. He was happy to hear that they had enjoyed themselves there. However, he told them it was time for them to start packing up. Tarta helped his grandfather carry the things. Tetia could not believe that it was already their last day. She said she was not even tired yet and could still help. Riche said the same. But Mr. Nulnoa explained that the secret to a happy and fulfilling job was knowing when it was time to stop. Meanwhile, Orujo was clearly exhausted as he sat off to the side. He agreed with Mr. Nulnoa. All he wanted now was to sleep and go home. Burnout was real, he said. If there was one thing he could teach them, it was not to become like him. They responded with, "Yes, master." Mr. Nulnoa looked confused and asked what had happened to leading by example. At that moment, Agat approached Orujo and apologized for bothering him even though he was tired. However, she had brought something for him. Orujo simply looked at her and asked to see it, which surprised Agat. He said she must have finished her spell by now. There was no reason for her to hesitate. Nothing energized him faster than the chance to examine a brand new seal. Agat grew shy as he carefully studied what she had made. A short while later, Kifri arrived and asked where his apprentices were. He invited them outside, saying there was something they needed to see. Outside, a procession was taking place. Dragons were flying overhead, and the ruler of the sea was waving to the people below. Coco asked what it was. Kifri explained that it was the Golden Eve procession, a parade for the leaders of the regular folk. Coco was confused by the phrase regular folk. Meanwhile, Tetia climbed onto Master Ali's shoulder so she could see more clearly. Because of that, she spotted the worm herder of Dragon Pass Isle and the needlework sprite of the Forestlands. Then something else caught her attention. She saw Prince Aeolio waving to the crowd. When he suddenly looked in her direction, she quickly climbed down. Orujo asked what was wrong. He thought she wanted to see the Whisker Cats, and this would have been her chance. But she turned away and said she would do that later. The prince continued watching her for a moment. Meanwhile, Tarta noticed that the king was not present in the parade. Judging from his tone, Mr. Nulnoa said it sounded like he was disappointed. Tarta denied it and said it was not a big deal. He had simply wanted to see the king for himself to find out what kind of person he was. His grandfather looked puzzled by that. Kifri explained that the final night of the celebration ended with the Silver Eve procession of the witches. However, they had to remember that witches were not the only inhabitants of that world. Silver Eve was a time for witches and ordinary people to come together, to sing to the night and gaze upon the stars while holding hands. Witches and normal people alike. Because of that, Coco began to wonder why they had been separated in the first place. She glanced aside and noticed a dark alley. Because of that, Mr. Nalnoa pulled her back and told her to be careful. He said she should return to the place where the lights were. Many dangers lurked in the darkness. She should stay away from the alleyways and keep especially far from the muck pool. But in Coco's mind, if only he knew, she had already seen those dark paths beyond the reach of the sunlight. And she knew that people lived there as well. She remembered Dagda and the story he had shared with Custis. After the procession, everyone could be seen resting in their respective tents. Some were busy working on spells, and among them was Agat, who was still practicing. When she finally finished and covered the light, she lay down to rest. However, she noticed that someone among her companions was still awake. Curious, she wondered if it was Coco and stepped outside her area. She asked if Coco was still awake. She told her that she needed to sleep. However, Coco kept repeating that she still needed to draw. There were too many thoughts running through her mind. What should she do? It seemed like she would not make it in time. She could not do it, and it was dangerous. Agat grew confused by her behavior. Coco asked what she should do now. She needed to keep drawing, but the lines would not come out. Agat became worried for her. Coco looked different. Then Coco said she could no longer draw anymore. What was she supposed to do now? It was noticeable that the papers in front of Coco were filled with erased marks and incomplete seals. Because of that, she asked Agat what she should do. She said she could no longer draw spells. Agat had not expected that at all. What did she mean she could not draw anymore? What exactly had happened? Coco struggled to answer. If she wanted to make it in time for the procession, she needed to come up with an entirely new spell, and she had to do it quickly. But the more she forced herself to do it, the less progress she made. Agat did not know what she should say or do for her. Coco explained that every time she managed to draw a few lines of a new seal, she immediately felt that it was not the right magic. So she would try something else, but the same thing would happen again. Then she would think about going back to what she had drawn earlier. But when she changed it again, it still felt wrong. She kept repeating the same cycle over and over. In the end, she took another sheet of paper and simply sat there staring at it. Before she even realized it, time had passed once again. The harder she tried to pull ideas out of her mind, the fewer ideas actually came. She admitted that she no longer knew what to do. She was truly trying her best, but nothing was working. Agat fell into thought. Coco had said she could no longer draw spells, yet there she was holding a pile of them in her hands. For a moment, Agat thought Coco meant that she might completely lose her ability to practice the art of magic. If that were the problem, she knew Coco would be able to solve it on her own. Coco asked again what she should do. She needed to overcome this. It was not only about getting the chance to join the procession. What if she lost everything and could no longer become a witch? Agat was about to say something, but when Coco looked at her, she stopped herself. Instead, she simply told her to forget it. It was nothing. If she did not feel like drawing right now, then maybe she should just sleep and try again in the morning. Agat returned to her bed and thought that it was not her problem anyway. She had no reason to give advice. Coco needed to find the answer herself. That would be better for her. It was not her concern. And besides, if Coco failed to overcome this and could not come up with a new spell, then that would mean one less witch competing with her in the procession. She buried her face in her pillow and felt bad for thinking something like that. She asked herself why she was always like that. Coco makes everyone look at her no matter what she did. She had not even gotten past the basics yet. The magic she drew was not particularly technical or difficult, and yet she somehow kept finding solutions that Agat had never thought of. Solutions that Agat believed she herself should have come up with. She thought that if she simply left Coco alone, perhaps Coco would sink into despair and eventually disappear from her world altogether. One less thing for her to worry about. One less thing to clutter her thoughts. She would finally be able to concentrate fully on her own magic. But as she thought that, she suddenly stopped. She imagined what would happen afterward. She abruptly stood up and pushed those thoughts away, calling herself a dummy for thinking like that. Then she turned to Coco and said that Coco might think she was the only witch who went through something like this, but the truth was that every witch experienced it. All the time. Coco was surprised to hear that and asked if it was really true. Agat said yes. For example, when you reached a dead end where no matter how many times you tried, the spell still would not come out right. Or when your hands stiffened while drawing because of pressure and anxiety, and you could not regain the confidence to continue. Or when there were other problems in your life, and drawing spells became the last thing on your mind. Or when you were in a hurry and could not focus. Or when you suddenly became self-conscious about how ugly your drawings looked. Or when your head was filled with too many ideas and you did not know which one to choose. Or when you were desperate to put something on paper but could not even start. Or when you lacked sleep or had not eaten yet. Coco simply stared at her while Agathe kept talking, admitting that those things happened to her as well. She often got stuck and could not draw. The reasons might not be exactly the same as Coco's, but every which had their own struggles. The truth was that sometimes the part of yourself that wanted to sit down and create was held back by another part of yourself that simply could not hold the pen. She scratched her head and said that Coco probably understood what she meant. Coco laughed at that. She said Agathe could not just leave it at that. She had to keep going and tell her that everything would be okay, because she would not know if it was true unless she heard Agathe say it herself. Agathe became embarrassed and said that Coco should already understand the message she was trying to convey. Coco thanked her and said she felt a little better now. Agathe asked if she was not all better already. At that moment, one of their companions' legs suddenly slipped from the top bunk while they slept. Agathe fixed it and said they should not disturb Tatia and Riche. They needed their rest. Coco did too, but if she still did not feel tired, Agathe invited her to go for a walk first. Coco might not know it, but she herself would appreciate the cool night air. Because of that, the two of them got dressed and quietly left their room. Outside, their masters could still be seen drinking together. Because of that, they slipped out of the tent slowly so they could walk around for a while. They carried a lamp to light their way. After finding a place where they could sit, Agathe asked Coco why she suddenly wanted to join the procession. Coco was surprised by the question. She said it was for a friend who needed her help. That friend had told her that if she managed to sell her spell during the procession, she would have the chance to speak with the king of the entire peninsula in person. And if that happened, she wanted to ask the king for a favor. She wanted to ask if there was anything he could do to save her friend, as well as her friend's father. Agathe then asked why it seemed that every time Coco drew magic, she was always doing it for someone else. Coco might not realize it, but that was the truth. Every time Agathe saw her casting a spell, it was always to help someone. She knew that because she herself was the opposite. If Coco was stuck trying to create something for someone else, then maybe she should set that aside for a moment and instead make a spell for herself. Coco paused when she heard that idea, a spell for herself. Agathe then took out her notebook and showed some of her favorite seals. She told Coco to look at the cool signs inside them. One represented a dragon, another a lion goat, and there were also symbols for torch stag and scale wolf. Those signs, she explained, were mostly decorative. They gave spells shapes that resembled the creatures they were named after. Unlike the functional signs they had learned from the primer, these had very little practical use. They focused more on spectacle than actual function. There were many of those symbols, and they took up a large amount of space inside a ring, which was why they were rarely seen nowadays. Over time, they had gradually faded from use. Most witches now only use them in personal doodles, if they used them at all. Even so, Agathe admitted that she liked those symbols and thought they were beautiful. Whenever there were times when she could not draw according to her plan, she cleared her mind and drew those kinds of spells instead, free from the pressure of expectations. She closed the ring of one of the spells in her palm choir, and flowers appeared from it. Coco said she felt like she had seen something like that before. On the day Master Kifri first brought her to Atelier, he had shown her a flower made of water. She said she had been completely captivated by it. And if Agathe remembered correctly, not long after that, Coco had sent a burst of water straight into her face. Coco suddenly became embarrassed and admitted that it was true. Even now, she still felt bad about it. One of her signs back then had simply been too long. Agathe told her that she should not feel that way. For a long time, she had felt that she was the one who should be apologizing instead. On the first day they met, she had said hurtful things about Coco and about Coco's mother. Because of that, she apologized. She apologized for bullying her, for forcing her into the test at Dada range, and for the way she had taken out her anger during the dragon's maze. All of it. She promised that she would never do those things again. Coco simply replied that it was okay and thanked her. Suddenly, an awkward silence settled between them. Agathe wondered if that was really all Coco was going to say. Coco looked confused and said yes. Was there something else she was supposed to say? Agat told her that she did not have to say anything more. Coco then admitted that Agat was right. What she had said back then really had hurt. A lot. But if she had promised not to do those things again, then that was enough for Coco. To be honest, she admitted that at first Agat had been a little scary. But later on, Agat had also taught her many things about magic and about life in Atelier. She had even saved her from danger several times. Because of that, everything was fine now. Agat asked if she was really sure. Coco replied that if it would make her feel better, then maybe she could teach her more about the signs she had shown earlier. Agat was surprised and immediately said of course. There was no problem with that at all. That night, the two of them tried many new spells together. They were simply having fun. In Agat's mind, it had only been a short while ago that Coco had been completely miserable because she could not draw, as if her whole world was ending. But now she was laughing uncontrollably at something Agat had drawn. Coco said it was the silliest thing she had ever seen. It looked like a glowing owl cat, and it even had fluffy winter plumage. She laughed and said it was so round. What kind of witch would even create something like that? Agat told her to stop, because Coco was laughing so much that she could barely hold her pen. Now Coco was making magic for herself instead of for others, while Agat was making magic for Coco instead of for herself. Because of that, Coco said she finally understood. At last she could see what people meant when they said that magic existed to help others. Agat was pleased to hear that realization. It was actually so simple to draw a spell for someone if you only thought about the smile they would wear when you showed it to them. Meanwhile, as the two of them were busy, Kifri and Arujo had been quietly watching them from nearby. Arujo was surprised. He said he had not realized Agat could smile like that. Even though they had not heard their conversation, judging by their expressions, he believed everything would probably be fine. However, Kifri did not respond. Arujo found that strange and asked if something was still troubling him. Kifri stood up and said he could not believe he had failed to notice it sooner. Coco's behavior had been very different. He was certain that she was hiding something from them. Arujo had not expected that. Was he talking about Coco? He was surprised and said that he had noticed it as well. Did Kifri mean the bangle on her wrist? Kifri looked puzzled by that. Arujo told him to listen carefully. No matter what happened, they must not confront her about it. Kifri asked why, since he was worried about that secret. Did he think Coco would only grow more distant if they questioned her? Arujo asked if he truly did not understand. Could he not see what it meant? That was not just a bangle. It was part of a pair. And the other one was wrapped around the arm of that small boy from the stationer's shop. They were identical. He was referring to Tarda. Kifri froze, realizing that they had been thinking about completely different things. Arujo continued, saying it was obvious what it was. A pair of accessories they had secretly bought at the festival. He even began to blush as he said there could only be one meaning behind that. And they were the last two people in the world who should interfere with something like that. Just imagine it, he said. What if someone else found out and started teasing them? In an instant, a tiny seed could be crushed mercilessly before it ever had the chance to grow and bloom with all its possibilities. It would be like stealing their youth away from them, and that would not be right. Kifri was left speechless by his theory. Arujo told him to trust him. The best thing they could do was simply leave the children alone. No interference, no nagging, and above all, no questions. Kifri was surprised and thought that Arujo seemed unusually passionate about the matter. He wondered if perhaps some kind of tragedy had happened in his past. He admitted that it made him wonder if there might be another reason behind Coco's behavior. If that were truly the source of her secret, then perhaps he could breathe a little easier. Arujo added that if the children needed help, they would come to them on their own. It was better to wait for them to bring their problems forward than to force them to speak. There was no need to rush. They could wait. What mattered more was becoming the kind of adults the children could approach and talk to. If they wanted the children to trust them, then they had to trust the children first. He then asked if Kifri agreed. Kifri paused for a moment before answering yes. He was right. However, he added that there were some truths that were difficult to say out loud, even when you trusted someone completely and desperately wanted to confess them. Arujo looked at him and asked that if the children really did have a problem, how serious was it? As he remembered, there had once been children who carried far too many secrets of their own. They had been just like them once. Because of that, Kifri admitted that he had a point. Arujo then recalled a saying that you could never understand the burdens of a master until you became one yourself. but he admitted he would not know, since he was not a master. That made Kifri pause in thought. Suddenly, he remembered that Lord Belderut was also in the area for the festival. He looked up toward the sky and wondered just how much Belderut might already know about what was happening. They then showed Kifri's master, Lord Belderut, and just as Kifri had expected, he was indeed in his rest. He could be seen together with the king, Dianraldi. As the king examined the wounds on Belderut's back, he said that it was a typical case of pressure lesions. Belderut's apprentice was surprised to hear that term. However, the king explained that they were more commonly known as bed sores. He said that such wounds were caused by poor blood circulation. In Belderut's case, it was most likely due to lying in the same position for a long time. The outer layers of the skin gradually died, causing the tissues beneath to swell and release fluid. He instructed them to keep the wounds clean. He would provide an ointment to help with healing, as well as poultices to cover them. He also suggested that Belderut try changing positions from time to time. The wise in teachings replied that he hoped what he was already doing would be enough. Unfortunately, ever since arriving at the castle, he had been forced to spend most of his days lying in bed. The king then ordered his attendants to bring a new set of blankets, ones that would be gentler on the skin. He also asked them to bring additional pillows so Belderut could support his body more comfortably. After that, the king turned to Belderut's apprentice and said he would demonstrate how to prepare the medicine and the proper way to care for the wounds so that they would not return. He was certain the wise one would feel more at ease knowing that his own attendant could handle the necessary treatments. At that moment, Lord Belderut spoke up and said that young Rilifin was his apprentice, not his servant. And in his opinion, it was not the boy's duty to mix medicines. The king then remembered the code that witches followed. If the stories were to be believed, the long-lasting peace of Estus was the result of sacred agreements sworn by their ancestors to maintain a certain distance between their cities and their relationships. Those who possessed magic and those who did not were not meant to mingle with one another unless it was truly necessary. They were not meant to interfere in each other's affairs in order to preserve harmony. That was what the witches believed. However, he added that those were very old and extremely rigid rules followed by witches. In his view, they were even a form of ignorance. For him, any tool that could ease a patient's suffering was a tool worth pursuing. And with that goal in mind, it seemed only reasonable for them to share knowledge with one another. He then asked if that logic was truly wrong. He looked at Belderut and smiled. Lord Belderut could hardly believe what he was hearing. Was the king saying that he wanted them to teach their methods to him? The king's words clearly implied what he would demand in return if they complied, and what he would withhold if they refused. Belderut said it was a filthy way to demand a sick man's treasures while holding power over him. He asked if that was the reason the king had chosen to study the art of healing, the reason he was called the King of Life. Did he expect Belderut to kneel and offer all of his knowledge and gratitude for a help that was nothing more than a cheap mask for control? The king's expression suddenly changed. He could not believe that Belderut had spoken about control disguised as aid. He stepped closer and said that such a topic should be very familiar to witches. The two of them stared at each other for a moment before Belderut suddenly threw a punch at the king. The king was caught off guard and stumbled back against the table beside him, causing the scale resting there to fall. Belderut said that the agreements between them were not nonsense. The balance of power had to be preserved so that the scales would not tilt to either side. Because if that happened, the very foundation that supported everything would collapse along with it. That was a truth the king should take to heart. After saying that, he addressed him as Your Majesty. The king fell silent when he heard that title from him. He remarked that the wise one seemed a little beside himself, so perhaps he should return another time. He knew it was not wise to argue with a cat whose fur was beginning to stand on end. Belderut could not believe he had just been called a cat. He began throwing objects at him and demanded to know why cat owners always had to relate everything to cats. King Dianraldi left the room with a smile. He laughed and said that he could never find a finer animal. As he walked through the hallway, he thought that witches, nevertheless, must not make mistakes. He understood why they refused to disturb the balance between them. It was an enormous test of discipline to grant a person power and expect them to restrain themselves from using it freely. He also understood the dangers. When magic and medicine were combined, the line between life and death could quickly become blurred. Even so, warnings like that rarely stopped human desire. Deny someone a treasure, and they would only desire it more. He glanced back for a moment and wondered if he was right. He waved his hand toward the people below and thought that this was the dream that once passed through the mind of nearly everyone at some point in their lives. They imagined a miraculous power living inside them, certain that one morning it would appear when they rose from bed. And even when the day came that they understood it would never happen, even when they lost hope for the day that would never arrive, their hearts still could not help but long for it, hoping that perhaps, somehow, they might still find a way to make the impossible possible. And with that thought, he continued walking. The scene shifted to Lord Belderut's room. The newly appointed Wise in Friendship was there and said that one only needed to imagine what would happen if His Majesty succeeded in further expanding his already formidable power. Anyone would begin to wonder what kind of ruler he would become if, aside from being a king and possessing knowledge of medicine, he were also to obtain all the mysteries of magic. Lord Belderut sat down and uttered the words, "Which king?" Lagra was surprised to hear that. Lord Belderut explained that he was merely thinking out loud about what title might suit a monarch who held complete mastery over magic. "I see," Lagra replied. "D'Anraldi, the Witch King." Meanwhile, the king entered an unknown room somewhere inside the castle for a purpose that had not yet been revealed. The scene then returned to the festival. Agat thanked Master Kifri for all the advice he had given her, as well as Master Ali. The two of them replied that they were happy to help and that she could come to them anytime if she had questions. Agat said she planned to experiment a little more. With just a few more adjustments, she believed she would be ready to submit her work for inspection. Kifri praised her and told her that once she was ready, she should bring it to him and he would take a look. However, he also reminded her that the deadline set by the Wise in Friendship was tonight. She was very close now, so she needed to keep going. Agat said she would. She returned to their room and noticed that Coco was still deeply absorbed in her work. She asked what kind of spell Coco had decided to create. But Coco did not notice her and gave no reply, completely lost in concentration and focus. Agat felt a slight shiver when she saw that, so she decided not to disturb her and instead went to her own bed to finish her own spell. In her mind, even though she had said many things the night before, she still had to admit that a small part of her felt jealous. Because when Coco finally broke free from her slump and inspiration arrived, it became so clear, so radiant, that it almost hurt the eyes to see how brightly it shone. She set down her papers and took out her wand. She still refused to give up. Not to Coco, and certainly not to that part of herself that sometimes wished Coco would simply disappear from her world. At that moment, the witches at the festival each had their own purpose. For Agat, it was the magic that would make people turn their heads. For Lord Bell, it was the magic that must be protected. For the king, it was the magic he had vowed to claim. For Aesthis, it was the magic they needed to seize from the hands of their enemies. For Inania of the Brimmed Caps, it was the magic whose true potential had not yet been fully opened. For Tarda, it was the magic he could use to help those in need. And for Coco, it was everything she was striving to accomplish through magic. A few moments later, Coco suddenly became excited when she realized she had finished. She quickly ran outside to call for Master Kifri. She told him that her spell was ready for the Silver Eve procession. The scene then shifted to the Tower of Tomes. Someone called out to the Madam Librarian, Madam Adina Arclom, saying that the window way had already been brought and that they should probably be leaving soon. After all, the procession was about to begin. It was revealed that she was Agat's mother, Adina. The day of the Silver Eve procession had finally arrived. Back at the festival, someone announced that the procession would begin at the central square. The circular float forms would serve as moving stages, pulled through the main streets along a grand route that circled the entire city. Standing atop those stages, witches would showcase their spells for everyone to see. As they talked about it, Kifri greeted his apprentices and happily shared the news that both Agat and Coco had passed the inspection of the Wise in Friendship. However, since they had submitted their entries at the last moment, he could not help but feel a bit concerned. They would be jumping straight into the procession. He asked if they were both truly ready. It was obvious how nervous they were. Coco stuttered as she answered that she was fine. Maybe yes, maybe no, but she was certain she would go through with it. Meanwhile, Agat kept repeating that all they had to do was cast their spell. Seeing their tension, Kifri told them to calm down and take a deep breath. At that moment, someone called out, asking if they had already received their flags and looking for those who had not. Tatia raised her hand and said they had not received theirs yet. Curious, Coco asked what the flags were for. Tatia explained that those small flags were handed out one per person, both to ordinary citizens and to witches who were not presenting a spell. While watching the procession, if they saw a contraption they liked and wanted to be made available to the public, they would wave their flags. If they believed a contraption was useful and could make their lives easier, they would vote for it that way. The king would then observe how many people waved their flags for each spell being presented, using it as a basis to determine which ones would be most beneficial to the people. And based on that, he would decide which contraptions to purchase. Kifri praised them and said that the greater the reaction a spell received, the more likely it was that the kingdom would place a large number of orders for it. But that was not all, Arujo added, which surprised Coco. He explained that sometimes, a spell that did not leave a strong impression on the majority could still shine a light on problems that only a few people experienced but were often overlooked. Kifri agreed. That was why even a single flag being waved, representing the wish of just one person, should never be ignored. Arujo said that exactly, because that meant the spell had value. It meant that somewhere in the world, there was someone who needed it. He tapped their backs and told them not to be shy. They should stand tall. And when it was their turn to step onto the stage, they should give it everything they had. They both responded with a firm yes, master. At that moment, someone called for the demonstrators. They pointed the way while telling the audience to find a good spot along the procession route. Just then, Kifri called out to Coco. She looked confused and asked what it was. Kifri hesitated, struggling to find the words, but he said that if whatever she was going through right now was something small, then that was fine. Coco was puzzled by what he meant, but he added that if she ever wanted to talk about it, he would be there for her anytime she needed. He would gladly listen to whatever she wanted to say, no matter what it was. At that very moment, Coco spotted Onii-Chan, the brimmed cap witch, standing among the crowd. The instant she saw her, Coco lost focus. She suddenly ran off. Tarda whispered that this was their chance, and Coco replied that she knew. Meanwhile, Kifri was left behind, confused about what was happening. Mr. Nalnoa approached Tarda and said that this was their opportunity. It was time for him to find his master. Tarda realized he was right. His grandfather added that with so many witches gathered for the procession, he was sure to find a good match. So he needed to keep his eyes open. Tarda agreed. But deep in his mind, the idea of choosing a master, something that should have filled him with excitement, now felt different. He wondered what had changed, but he already knew the answer. He was filled with doubt. Doubt toward the adults and their lies. Doubt toward witches themselves. No matter who he chose as his master or who he turned to for guidance, in the end, they were all witches. And that meant none of them would want to help Custis. Because of that, he wondered how he could call someone master if he could not respect the decisions they made. The only witch he could imagine studying under was. Before he could finish that thought, someone called out to him. It was Kifri. He asked if something was wrong, saying Tarda looked extremely tense, just like their friends who were about to step onto the stage. Tarda replied that it was nothing and that he was fine. Then he ran off, saying he would go look for a flag since he had not received one yet. But Kifri called after him and said that if he needed anything, or if there was any way he could help, he should just say so. He offered to do whatever he could for him and for Coco. Tarda glanced back for a moment as Kifri returned to his apprentices. He tightly gripped his cloak and wondered how Kifri had known. After some time, the moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived, the Silver Eve procession. From the balcony, the 5 kingdom rulers watched from above. The ruler of the flocks wondered what kind of spectacle they would witness this time, while the ruler of the fields expressed excitement for the procession. Lagra then asked the king for a signal on whether they could begin. When the king gave a nod, he immediately ordered the start of the event. A voice rang out, calling to the good citizens of the peninsula and announcing with great joy that the Silver Eve procession had officially begun. Each witch participating in the demonstration stood atop their own circular float form as they moved through the city's main streets. The crowd was encouraged to wave their flags and toss flowers as the witches passed by, filling the streets with dazzling lights and breathtaking displays that seemed powerful enough to drive away the night itself. The participating witches lined up, ready to showcase their creations. One of them presented a unique broom, demonstrating how incredibly easy it was to use, clearly proud of what he had made. Coco was impressed as she watched. A young girl approached them and said that the one on stage was her master. She asked for their opinion on his fully automatic dust chomp sweeper, saying it was amazing. She introduced herself as Juji and asked if they were there to assist their master for the demonstration. Agat replied that they were not, and that they would be presenting their own spells. Juji was amazed and said that was a big deal. The two introduced themselves as well and said they were pleased to meet her. Juji paused when she heard Agat's name, saying it sounded familiar. Just as she was about to mention why, someone suddenly interrupted and called out Agat's full name. He said he had not expected to see her there. He thought she would know better than to show up in places where she did not belong. Agat recognized him and called him Laroga Renton. Laroga asked if she had forgotten already. The procession, he said, was meant to showcase original spells. He mocked her, saying that as far as he knew, copycats were not welcome there. He wondered if she was really planning to step onto that stage. If so, he only needed to ask, whose spell had she stolen this time, calling her a thief? Coco grew irritated at his words. Agat firmly replied that she had not stolen anything. She grabbed him and demanded if he had heard her clearly. He needed to stop spreading rumors about her. She admitted that she may have been too afraid to defend herself before. But now, she understood that staying silent only made her look guilty. She was no longer that girl. She would not stay quiet while he dragged her name through the mud. So she told him clearly, one last time. That was her spell, and she had not stolen it from anyone. Laroga pulled himself free and said that she looked even worse when she was angry. He insisted he knew he was right. He had always thought there was something suspicious about her. Her spells were far too refined and well-made for someone her age. Because of that, he was certain she was cheating. What other explanation could there be? At that moment, someone answered him. It was Coco. She said she had seen how Agat drew her spells. The reason they were so impressive was because of the effort she poured into them. She worked hard on every single detail. She pushed her mind to its limits, searching for answers, tried to learn everything she possibly could, and gave everything she had into the spells she created. That was why her spells turned out so beautiful. Coco asked if he could not see that. There was no way she could be using someone else's spell, because copying meant you did not have to struggle for it. Laroga asked what she was talking about. Coco explained that when you copied, you did not need to think. You simply followed the motions. You traced the lines, and before you even realized it, you were already done. There was no pain, no struggle, no forcing your mind. At least not while you were drawing. The real hardship of copying came afterward. Once you finished, that was when you realized you had taken on a problem far greater than what you could handle. That was where regret came in, and it would stay with you. You would have to carry it for the rest of your life. Laroga was taken aback by how intense her words were and asked who she even was. Coco added that she understood the danger of using someone else's work. She asked if his name was not Laroga. She did not know where or how he had come to know Agat, but the Agat she knew was someone who constantly worked hard to improve herself. When faced with a wall, she always found a way to overcome it. That was her Agat. Agat was her fellow apprentice, someone who had helped her countless times. If he had seen the piles of practice sheets that stacked up on her desk at the end of every day, he would understand. That was who Agat truly was. And the Agat she knew also made some spells that were actually really cute. Like the time she made her stuffed animals dance. Agat was shocked that she even brought that up. But Coco did not stop. She continued, saying that whenever Agat drew at her desk, her legs would always fidget and move around, something that was completely unlike her usual self. At that point, Agat stepped in and tried to stop her, saying that was enough. She pleaded with Coco to stop talking about it. Coco looked confused and said she still had a lot more she could share, but Agat was already blushing and insisted that was more than enough. At that point, everything had become absurd for Agat. Honestly, she no longer cared about his accusations. She would never cheat, especially when there was a fellow witch like Coco who genuinely admired her. Coco agreed and added that the only thing she had ever seen Agat secretly do was sneak a little food from the table before mealtime. Agat was shocked that she had even noticed that. Meanwhile, Laroga could not believe what he was hearing. Juji then asked him if he was the one claiming that Agat had stolen a spell from him. He stepped back and said no, but insisted that it was what everyone else was saying. Juji looked disappointed upon hearing that he had not even been there when it supposedly happened. She told him to stop picking fights and just leave. It was obvious he was only trying to bring down someone more talented than himself. He was a witch, so he should act like one. And if he wanted to embarrass Agat, then he should simply improve himself and prove it through his own ink. Laroga trembled with anger and shouted for them all to be quiet. He said that Agat should have already lost hope and disappeared from his world so he would not have to think about her anymore. That way, there would be one less thing cluttering his mind, one less thing he would have to worry about. He turned his head in frustration and said that if she were not around, he would finally be free to focus on his own magic. In the end, he told her to go ahead and step onto the stage, fail completely, and embarrass herself. Her spells were not even that impressive, and he insisted that he had never once been impressed by anything she had made. But in truth, he had been amazed by every single one of Agat's spells. Even the brush buddy seemed to want him gone. Juji asked him what he was still doing there, and Coco also looked surprised. Agat said that just like before, he had probably seen her and tried to shake her confidence. He had always been like that. Fortunately, his plan had backfired. Coco believed in her, and now she could finally believe in herself and in her own abilities as well. Coco was about to say something more when Arujo suddenly arrived. He said he had been looking for the two of them. It was almost their turn, and he asked if they were ready. Upon hearing that, Coco said yes. Agat added that they were ready, both in spell and in spirit. With that, Arujo told them to head to the stage. Meanwhile, Juji's master, Highheart, arrived. He questioned what had happened and complained that it was unfair. How had Juji managed to befriend witches who were apprentices under his previous bestie? Hearing that, Juji suddenly realized why Agat's name had sounded familiar. Now everything made sense. The window way for the demonstrators was then shown. The organizers began ushering them inside so they could rise onto the stage and join the procession. The participants hurried forward, including Arujo. He stepped through the window way and emerged before the audience, presenting his spell. The king was pleased to see him there. Even the rulers of the 5 kingdoms recognized him as the Fire Witch. They called him Arujo of the Torch. The ruler of the flocks admitted he was a big fan, while the ruler of the field said he could not wait to see what he had prepared for the night. As their excitement grew, someone else arrived at their side. She was being guided by Prince Aeolio. A woman thanked Aeolio for helping her, though she said she was already fine. The people present were surprised when they saw her. It was Queen Zayamaya. The king immediately stood upon seeing her and hurried over, embracing his wife as he told her that she did not need to come all the way up there. He could have simply brought the program down to her so she could watch it afterward. The queen replied that she knew he could do that, but it would not be the same as seeing the spells in person. To truly understand them, she needed to witness them herself. Besides, she could not bear to miss the performance. She was certain that if she stayed inside, she would miss something truly wonderful. Meanwhile, Arujo was busy showcasing his own contraption. The crowd was amazed by the torch he held, wondering what exactly surrounded its flame. It looked like some kind of gemstone encasing it. Moments later, a light struck the torch, and fragments of stone emerged from it. He tossed them into the crowd, leaving everyone surprised and intrigued. They thought he was giving them away. When someone caught one, they noticed a flame burning inside the crystal. A child watched in awe as the fire flickered and danced like a real flame. His mother commented on how beautiful it was, but asked if it was hot, worried that her child might get burned. The child replied that it did not feel hot at all in his fingers. Maybe it was safe to hold because it was magical fire. A man nearby said not to be ridiculous. The only reason he could hold it was because the flame was sealed inside a crystal. Fire was still fire. An open flame would burn, whether it was magic or not. That was when the child realized that it was only safe as long as it remained inside the crystal. When Tetia saw this, she understood. When Master Ali had rejected the phantasmal fireball before, it was because he feared that people might forget how dangerous fire truly was. So to solve that problem, all Arujo had done was make the fire appear dangerous, even though it could not actually harm anyone. Kifri heard that and said they had understood it well. By enclosing the flame so it could not be touched, the sense of danger remained intact. In that way, it removed confusion about how different kinds of fire should be handled, while still providing a safer alternative for people. He thought about how Orujo must have returned to his designs, and after carefully re-examining his invention, had created this improved version. Riche realized that he had not given up after all. He had found a way to overcome the weaknesses of his spell. He made it work. Tatia was impressed and said there was something about it that was truly amazing. Kifri agreed, but then asked if they were forgetting something. His apprentices and Tarda were surprised by the question. He said that each and every one of them was a remarkable and talented witch still in the process of being shaped. Meanwhile, the crowd erupted in excitement. Their flags were raised high as they watched. They could hardly believe it, a torch that could not start a fire. It could not be put out by wind or storms either. They began discussing how they would no longer need oil. It could even be used on ships. And best of all, it was safe enough for children to hold. Someone added that, honestly, it was also beautiful. It would look wonderful as a pendant or a brooch, and he wanted to send one to someone he loved. Seeing all of that, Coco was amazed. She watched as countless flags waved across the crowd, all of them from Master Ali. At that moment, she was already on the stage. Through a mirror, Agat called her attention and reminded her that she was already up there and her turn was coming. She should be thinking about her own spell now, not Master Ali's invention. Juji wondered in confusion, since she thought a looking glass was only for seeing, not for talking. Coco pulled the jar in front of her and told herself to focus. They just needed to wait until they saw her spell. She lifted the large jar onto her shoulder, and from it, filthy water poured out, shocking the crowd. She transferred the dirty liquid into another container. The people were confused, wondering what she was doing. The water smelled terrible. They recognized it as wastewater and questioned why she was pouring it from one container to another. She set down the jar filled with filth and picked up another vessel. Then, suddenly, Coco threw the water out while smiling. The crowd recoiled in disgust, saying she should not be pouring something like that on them. But moments later, they realized something strange. It did not smell. The water had been purified. Kifri explained to Tatia that Coco's spell allowed citizens to dispose of their dirty water after it had been cleaned. Coco had created a smaller version of the seal used in the sewer gates and used it to develop a portable wastewater purification pot. At present, only a single seal on a grate was responsible for cleaning all the wastewater from the entire city. Because of that, filth constantly accumulated in the area they called the muck pool. Because of that, Coco thought, what if every household had its own small seal, just like the one in the sewer grate? If each person took responsibility for their own wastewater and purified it before disposing of it into the canals, then perhaps the waterways flowing into the muck pool would begin to change. If that happened, even the canals that ran through the muck pool might eventually look different. From a rooftop, Custis watched her demonstration. He wondered if what he was seeing was truly real. Meanwhile, Coco thought about how she wanted to use her magic to help. For Custis now, and for Custis back then. She knew it was just water, but having access to clean water was something incredibly important. She remembered how, back in her village, she had to carry a heavy bucket all the way from a spring deep in the forest. Then she would have to go back again just to dispose of the dirty water. Suddenly, Coco was startled. Tarda was waving his flag. He was confused. What was happening? Why was no one else waving their flags for her spell? The crowd began to murmur. They complained that they still had to dispose of their water just like before, but now they would also have to clean it first. They were disappointed. Some said it might be useful for collecting clean water outside, but they already had vapor bubbles for that. They were satisfied with the current system. To them, it felt like a waste of time to have to place dirty water into another container before throwing it away. They questioned how exactly it would make their lives better. Hearing their complaints, Kifri admitted that he had not expected that, which surprised Tarda. He explained that witches used their spells to help others. That was the way their world worked, which was why he had assumed Coco's spell was simple and clear in its purpose. But for many non-witches, what mattered most was whether a spell would save them time or effort. It was difficult for people to care about the needs of others when their own needs had not yet been met, especially when helping others required using a costly contraption. Coco suddenly lost her balance and stumbled, collapsing right there on the stage. As a result, the jar in front of her tipped over and its contents spilled out. Her master and her companions immediately grew concerned. Coco tried to catch the jar and wondered what she was supposed to do now. Her master had once said that even a spell that received only a few flags still meant that someone in the world needed it. But what about a spell that barely received any flags at all? Would the king still choose to buy it? Right now, it felt like no one cared about her spell. She looked toward where the royal family was seated and thought that this meant it was over. That meant she would not get the chance to help anyone at all. She did not know what to do. Before, she would always say she had no idea what to do, but she had already moved past that. She had pushed herself further and started asking what she could do to make things work. But what if she still failed, even after giving it everything she had? What was she supposed to do then? Suddenly, Agat called out to her. Coco turned and was shocked to see her jump onto the stage and join her. The organizer was caught off guard since it was not yet Agat's turn, yet she had already stepped in. Even Master Ali could not believe it and wondered what she was doing. Their fellow apprentices were just as surprised. Agat reached out to Coco and told her to pull herself together. She must not let a small setback knock her down. Yes, things were not going well right now, but that had never been a reason for her to give up before. She knew what to do. Because of that helping hand, Coco stood up and agreed. She gathered her courage, determined not to let them down. Agat helped her to her feet and said that if her first plan had failed, then all she needed to do was come up with a new one. She then added that she had an idea for her and asked if she wanted to try it. Meanwhile, in the distance, someone peeked out and thought that the procession must have already begun. They could hear the loud cheers of the crowd, as if everyone was celebrating. It was the man whom Lelusi and the other Knights Morales had caught earlier for selling illicit contraptions, and he pointed out that all the city guards were outside, busy watching over the people. Because of that, he realized it was the perfect opportunity to escape. However, he muttered in frustration that if only they could cast a spell or two, they could do it. The one he was with, Lord Engendale, then said that there were ways. He removed a ring from his finger and used it to place something onto his hand. As the other man stepped closer, he noticed that the gemstone from the ring was actually a piece of hardened woodcrewer. Even so, he said it was still useless for them. Had he forgotten that magic did not work within the walls of Castle as Rest? Engendale agreed, saying yes, inside the walls. They both turned their gaze toward the small opening in their cell. A narrow air passage, too tight for anything more than their arms to pass through. But their fingers could already reach the open sea beyond the walls. He then asked if he wanted to try. After all, there was nothing magic could not do, as long as one did not concern himself with how it worked. Coco asked what her idea was, what exactly the other plan she had in mind would be. Agat replied that it was not really a full plan, just a small addition to the signs. But if it worked, she believed it might make people more interested in her spell. As the two of them talked, the people below simply watched. Agat added that it was a good thing they were positioned high up. If she leaned down, the people would not have the angle to see her adjusting the seal. Coco grew curious and asked what else could be added to improve the spell. That surprised Agat. In her mind, she was in the middle of her own performance, and now another girl from their atelier had suddenly stepped in to interfere and offer advice she had not even asked for. And yet, Coco had accepted her, even asked for her help. Agat realized that was Coco's strength, something she herself did not have. But ever since Coco joined them, she had shown her how to rely on the people around her. So this time, it would be her turn to share. This time, she would give Coco something she had that Coco did not. She took the jar, then called Coco to listen. She said that earlier, Coco mentioned she always drew spells for others. But that had only started after she became a witch. She asked if Coco still remembered what it felt like when she was younger, before she joined them. What kind of dream she had about using magic back then. Coco paused to think, then answered. At first, she had wanted to fly through the sky. She wanted the ground beneath her feet to glow wherever she went. She wanted to learn the language of animals and talk with them all day. She wanted to light the fire in a fireplace with just a touch of her finger and put it out the same way. She wanted to weave rainbows into thread and sew them into clothes. She wanted to summon a grand feast onto a table in a puff of smoke. And she wanted to go back to the past and meet her father. She closed her eyes and admitted that she had forgotten all of that. In the beginning, all she had ever thought about was the wonder and excitement of it all. Agat then told her that if she looked down, she would see that the faces staring up at her were shining with that same sense of wonder she once had. Coco was suddenly startled when water brushed against her cheek. Agat held her hand and told her that it was already Silver Eve. As jars floated around them, she explained that the people gathered there for new ideas that could change their lives. But she added that they were also there to be amazed. She said that this was the kind of magic they were looking for. Around them, the water began to take the form of animals, and Coco was deeply impressed by the sight. She realized that these were signs from the previous night. Upon witnessing it, Kifri thought that the water sculpting sign had been used. He figured that Agat had likely added it to the seals on the vase. Even the other apprentices were impressed and found it beautiful, including Tarda. Agat then explained that that was not the only change she had made. The people noticed that the water was shifting direction, and they wondered where it was heading. It seemed that all of it was flowing toward the same destination. A man pointed out that it was going toward the sewers. The water that rose from the pot moved on its own and flowed straight into the wastewater pool. They could hardly believe what it meant. It meant that they no longer needed to manually dispose of their dirty water into the wastewater pool. All they had to do was pour it into the pot, and the water would carry itself there. Because of this, the people were delighted and began to cheer. One person said that the nearest wastewater pool to their home was all the way at the bottom of a hill, making it very difficult to reach. Another said that the one he used was on the other side of the plaza, and he had to drag his pots through crowds of people. They could not believe such a possibility. There would be no more scrubbing of foul-smelling and filthy pots at home, and no more walking through the cold during winter. They felt excited about the relief it would bring to their backs, as carrying and disposing of water was heavy work. The thought that they would no longer have to lift heavy containers eased their hearts, and they eagerly hoped to have it as soon as possible. When a child saw it, she asked her parents if she could be the one to dispose of the water once they had it at home. But her older sibling cut in and said that it was not fair because he also wanted to do it. Their mother was surprised that they were willingly volunteering for household chores. Because of that, she asked her husband to raise the flag, and he did. The people cast their votes for Coco's contraption. Seeing this, Tatia tugged on Kifri's cloak and told him to look at the flags. He had not expected it. Tarda was also overjoyed that Coco had managed to do it, saying that she had pulled it off. As they celebrated on the stage above, the people below were just as happy. Coco peeked out and saw the countless flags, and she said that they had done it. She was filled with happiness and told Agat that it was all because of her wonderful idea, and she congratulated her friend. She said that she could see it now, that she needed to create her spell for everyone, not only for the people who would benefit from it, but also for the people she hoped would one day use it, because otherwise, she might not get the chance to bring happiness to everyone. Agat said that she was right, and reminded her not to forget that it should also be for the witch who created it. Coco paused and thought about that. Agat told her not to forget that when she created something for everyone, she had to include herself in it as well. She added that when Coco stepped back and looked at the spell she had worked so hard on and poured her entire heart into, it should also make her happy. And if Coco ever forgot that, she would simply share everything she had in abundance. She would show her how to think of things for herself, because that was the part that made her who she was. Meanwhile, Arujo watched them from the other stage with pride. Meanwhile, from a dark alley, Coco noticed a flag being raised, and it came from Dagda. She turned back when someone suddenly called her name. It was Tarda, trying to get her attention as he pointed straight ahead. When Coco looked, she saw the king staring directly at her. She was startled and thought that it must be the Peninsular King, the one who might be able to save Custas and Dagda. Agat also noticed the king and thought that if that was indeed the king along with the 5 rulers, then the wise ones must also be seated in the box, together with the person she had been searching for. She was shocked when she saw a woman there. It was none other than her mother. She lost focus upon seeing her and walked straight ahead, thinking that she needed to return to her own stage. But when she reached the edge, the platform shook and tilted, causing her to fall along with the jars. She was about to crash to the ground, and the jar shattered first. Fortunately, someone caught her, and it was Master Ali, who immediately asked if they were all right. Arujo then asked the person in charge what was happening and why everything had suddenly stopped. The man apologized and said that he did not know, but the Eldrican refused to move. They were usually gentle, but something unusual had disturbed their behavior, causing them to break free as if they were afraid. Kifri noticed this and wondered about it. The entire herd seemed to be struggling to break away from the platforms. He could not remember the last time he had seen an Eldrox in such a state of panic. He suddenly realized that they were afraid, but he questioned what could be causing it. Seeing this, Coco acted and flew upward. Orujo tried to stop her, but she continued anyway. When she reached above, she noticed that Custis was also floating. Fear was evident in his eyes, and even he was shocked by what lay ahead. He wondered if that thing was created by magic. As they hovered in the air, a massive and strange creature appeared before them, emerging from the direction of the prison. It was connected to a hand marked with a seal. A prisoner stood there and remarked that it was yet another fool who had never stopped to think about why the taboos existed. A massive hole had formed in their cell, and his companion could be seen being gradually consumed by that magic until he completely disappeared.